It was a terribly rainy and cold day, but despite the bad weather, Robert confidently approached one of the bank branches with 2 strong black bags filled to the brim. On the phone, he listened to his brother's words about how he was unhappy with the hero's decision to sell the house in order to invest all the proceeds into the business. Soon, Robert finally reached the bank doors and walked inside, not at all surprised by the large number of people on such a rainy day. Interrupting his brother, he assured him that he would definitely succeed. But these words, on the contrary, only provoked the man even more, and he, no longer mincing words, listed to Robert how many times he had failed in life, remaining a pathetic loser, and finally told the hero not to remember him anymore. Because from that moment on, they were nothing to each other. Such a clear break in brotherly ties and a reminder of his own failures sent pain through the boy's heart. He couldn't respond to this, but only pursed his lips with regret. As soon as the call was dropped, his hand holding the phone dropped limply. Robert was bullied by others from childhood, and whenever he wanted to skip classes, he was immediately caught and taken back. As a result, he graduated from school with the worst grades and was unable to get into college. For this reason, he could not find a single place where he could be hired. Now Robert's last hope is that at least once he will succeed in something. Suddenly his number was announced and he was told to go to window number 3. Before our hero could take a step, something strange happened. A blue window of the price devaluation system appeared in front of him with a message that the loading of the new world was complete and the prices in this world were reduced by 1,000,000 times, and Robert's assets remained unchanged. After reading this, the hero was perplexed. He looked around, checking other people's reactions, and decided that his strong desire to succeed had simply caused him to hallucinate. With these thoughts, he went to the right window and, putting both bags on the table, said that he wanted to put money into the account. Alicia sighed with displeasure and reached for the bags in front of her, assuming that there wouldn't be that much money there and she wouldn't have to count it for long. However, as soon as she saw the contents, a mixture of surprise and bewilderment appeared on her face. From the bills inside, the girl realized that she had not met a poor man, as she had mistakenly thought. With a voice trembling with excitement, she asked Robert how much he wanted to invest, to which the guy replied that he needed to put in $8,000. Alicia looked around frantically and, picking up the phone, said that she couldn't help him with this issue and would therefore contact the head office. A few minutes later, a white foreign car drove up to the bank building. Armed soldiers immediately ran out of the cars that had stopped nearby. A gray-haired man in a business suit was already waiting for our hero among the soldiers and, waving at Robert, told him to get into the car. The shocked and bewildered boy complied with the man's demand. As soon as he was inside, all the soldiers ran back and the cars moved off. Sitting inside the limousine with a crowd of armed soldiers, Robert felt extremely uncomfortable and still did not understand what was happening because he only wanted to deposit $8,000. Suddenly, in a small window, he noticed a sign about a promotion where you could buy 10 cans of milk for the price of 1. A guy standing next to one of these signs was happily shouting into the telephone receiver that he had been given a bonus of 5 fen. Listening to his conversation, Robert became even more confused, because for a prize, such an amount was ridiculously small. At that moment, he remembered the system window that had suddenly appeared in front of him in the bank and its contents. If earlier he had written it off as hallucinations from stress, now he was more confident that it was real. A man who suddenly approached him pulled him out of his train of thought and, smiling broadly, introduced himself as an employee of the bank's main office. Robert did not understand the reason for his politeness, but decided that it would be very useful to have the favor of such a man and asked how much it cost him to make such a wonderful suit. Previously, he could not even dream of entering the lobby of the bank's main office. When Justin replied that his suit was not particularly expensive and cost only 2 fen, the hero was very surprised to hear the price mentioned and asked with bewilderment in his voice if this was a joke. But the man's reaction clearly indicated that he was not joking, and this information convinced Robert even more that prices in this world had really fallen. Reflecting on how much the world had changed, he reached into one of the bags and pulled out a bill. Taking a closer look, Robert noticed that the bills had become much denser and were not as easy to tear as before. Curious about what was inside these bills, he tore it apart. This action of the guy caused the strongest shock and bewilderment in Justin, who decided that the rich have terribly strange hobbies, tearing up limited edition banknotes, which can only be possessed after reaching a certain status like ordinary paper. Having approached the desired building, the car stopped. When Robert got out of the car, he saw a tall building with an unusual design. Justin, standing next to him, said that this was the main office of their bank. Inside, they were met by a beautiful girl who introduced herself as Louise and said that she would advise Robert on all matters. Having noticed the girl's beauty and slender figure, the hero handed her the bags and said that he would like to deposit the money into the account. She nodded and replied that she would immediately sort everything out. Afterwards, she returned to her seat and put the money into the counting machine. In the meantime, she sat down to fill out the necessary form. The hero, who was led into the waiting room, looked around warily. He did not understand the reasons for such an attitude towards himself, and therefore began to worry seriously. He began to suspect Justin, who was sitting silently next to him, of planning to gain his trust and then get rid of him. After a few minutes of tense silence, Louise entered the room with a cup of coffee for the guest. Surprised by her quick appearance, Robert went into the bank to check if the money had arrived in his account. At the same moment, a message came from the banking, informing him that the total amount in his account was 664,188 yuan 85 fen. Hearing this, Louise dropped the cup from her hands, never reaching the table. Justin, who jumped up from his seat, was no less shocked than she was. Meanwhile, the banking reported that the remaining 1.5 million were saved in a savings account, and about 12,000 yuan would be credited to the bank card every month. But the hero was dissatisfied, deciding that this was too little. Justin and Louise couldn't believe that someone would call such a huge amount too small, when the richest man in China has 380 million in his account. Taking out their business cards, they simultaneously bowed low before Robert and said that if he needed anything, they would immediately arrange it. The hero took the business cards and headed towards the exit, thanking them for the offer, saying that it was time for him to go. Justin and Louise were overjoyed to have the privilege of helping such a wealthy man. Some time later, Robert came to the gym to visit his friend. He decided that for a while he should let go of thoughts about the strangeness of what was happening and try to relax. When a familiar voice from behind called out to him, he immediately turned around. In front of him, Robert saw Angelica braiding her long hair into a ponytail. Looking at her, he smiled and pointed his thumb up. An irritated Angelica kicked him in the leg, asking why he was staring at her like that. Her irritation disappeared almost instantly, and the girl herself sighed resignedly. Noticing her dejected state, Robert asked what had happened to her. She again intended to hit the guy in the chest, but he managed to put his palms out as a defense, and Angelica's blows landed on them. She complained with displeasure that yesterday they were handing out advertisements for Beachy again, and the price of 800 mao seemed like a real robbery to her. Lightly holding back her furious blows, Robert smiled slightly and said that until she got used to adult life, she would continue to be disappointed in her. Deciding that as long as he had money, he was capable of anything, he stepped closer to Angelica, closing the distance between them, and offered his help. His words only amused the girl. Laughing, she said that it was impossible because he was poorer than her and headed towards the exit. Robert wanted to help her because she had once helped him too. The last time his business failed, he was about to throw himself off a bridge, but she saved him at the last moment. And after that, she invited me to her place and gave me a spare room. For this reason, our hero decided that he was obliged to repay her for all the kindness shown to him. A little later, they left the hall together and went to a clothing store, because in a few days, Angelica needed to be at an event, and for this, she was going to rent a dress. As soon as they entered, they were greeted by a pretty girl who led them to the dress department, saying that these outfits would suit Angelica best. Robert looked around and noticed that the clothes here did not look cheap, and if his girlfriend was ready to rent such an expensive dress, then the upcoming event was quite serious. Our heroes turned around at the same time when someone suddenly called out to Angelica. Olivia recognized her old friend from behind and, approaching her together with her man, haughtily asked what brought Angela here. Robert noticed the change in his girlfriend's mood almost immediately after this meeting. Meanwhile, Olivia explained to her companion that this girl was her former classmate and that at one time she had been very stupid in refusing a rich heir. Without taking his eyes off Angelica, Paul smiled unkindly, deciding that she would be his new target. Meanwhile, Olivia continued to mock her old friend, asking if she would really dare to come to Yana's birthday party and that if she didn't have money, there was no point in trying to pretend to be someone else by stooping to renting clothes. Her words irritated Angelica. When she was about to respond to the barbs directed at her, Robert stepped forward and said that, unlike some people, Angela was quite beautiful and would look good in absolutely any clothes. In response to this, Olivia, pointing at the guy, replied with displeasure that people like him belong on the farm and that he should stand quietly to the side and keep his mouth shut. Then she switched back to Angela, asking how much longer she would pretend to be someone she was not, since it was high time for her to accept her position and not flicker around in front of others. Seeing how much her face twisted in displeasure, Olivia smirked smugly, saying that she came here to buy clothes, not to rent them like some people. To the surprise and bewilderment of our heroes, immediately after these words, Paul pushed the girl standing next to him aside, saying that she was too cruel. Without taking his gaze off Angelica, which did not bode well, he said that he had a lot of money and he could lend a little, allowing Angelica to buy any outfit that was there. Angelica involuntarily stepped back. At that moment, Olivia pressed herself against him, saying in a slightly displeased voice that she was against it, since he had already promised to buy her clothes, especially since he didn't know Angelica's tastes at all. Our heroes watched the argument between this couple with bewilderment. With a sigh of disappointment, Angelica took Robert's hand and said that she had had enough, so they were leaving. But the hero stopped her, asking her to wait. Afterwards, he turned to a consultant standing nearby and asked whether the two had already managed to buy anything, to which the girl answered negatively. Robert nodded contentedly and said that he would buy up all the things in this store and, pointing to the couple in front of him, asked that they not sell anything else here. His words brought surprise to the faces of Paul and Olivia. But it quickly passed, and Olivia, laughing loudly, asked if Robert was in the condition to play the hero, and if he even knew how much it would cost him to buy all the things in this store. The hero smiled and, taking out his wallet, replied that she was right about that. He had no idea about it. Opening his wallet, he pulled out a 5 yuan bill, saying that such trifles did not bother him at all. When Paul saw the contents of the wallet, he was horrified, involuntarily deciding that Robert had robbed a bank, because an ordinary person would never get such a huge amount of money. Meanwhile, the hero handed the consultant one of the bills and asked if it would be enough to buy all the clothes. She, looking at the outstretched money, hesitantly answered that it was too much. Olivia and Paul were trying to figure out if this was a prank and where Angelica had dug up this guy. Robert, not paying any attention to them, smiled contentedly at his surprised friend and said that since the problem with her clothes was now solved, they could now go get a bite to eat somewhere. The couple opposite started to get nosebleeds from this scene. Suddenly, a dark-haired girl entered the room, accompanied by 2 security guards, who introduced herself as Anna, said that she was the owner of this store, and that she had not expected at all that Mr. Robert would already be here as soon as she had returned from Justin. Hearing a familiar name, our hero became wary, because he did not expect that this old man would start acting so quickly. Still addressing Robert, Anna suggested that they go upstairs and discuss everything. Deciding that he could learn more about his and Justin's affairs from this conversation, he agreed to her proposal. As soon as Anna received his answer, she turned her gaze to the other couple and asked if these two were his friends. An excited Paul replied that they were very close friends. Olivia decided to play along too, and grabbing Angela's hand, said that she and Robert's girlfriend were best friends. She decided to take advantage of this great opportunity and get closer to the owner of this store. Slightly surprised, Anna asked if they were classmates. Angelica, trying to pull her hand away, wanted to answer that this was not so, but Olivia interrupted her and, pressing a little closer to her, told her to stop being shy. When Anna believed her words, Olivia grinned triumphantly. Meanwhile, Anna turned to her employee and asked her to prepare 5 premium clothing cards with a 30% discount and 2 of her business cards. Looking at Angelica's expression, she realized that the relationship between the girls was far from close. But she decided that she should first win Robert's favor, and then figure out everything else. Olivia was pleased that everything had gone so well and that she was now one step closer to a happy future. However, the next moment everything went completely wrong according to her plan. A disgruntled Robert stepped forward and said that if Anna wanted to meet these two, then so be it. But he refused to participate in this and did not want them to use his name so brazenly. Immediately after that, he grabbed Angelica by the hand and headed towards the exit, throwing out at the end that poor people like them were unworthy of associating with noble persons like Olivia. For details about what was happening, he advised Anna to contact her employee. She immediately approached her boss and told her the situation that had developed. Anna's face instantly distorted with displeasure. Having caught up with our heroes, she blocked their path, apologizing for all the inconvenience and asking them not to leave so quickly. Then she turned around and ordered her guards to throw those two out of here. Unhappy with what was happening, Olivia and Paul began to protest when they were grabbed by the scruff of the neck. Ignoring their words, the guards, as they were ordered, threw the couple out. Anna didn't stop there and told Maria that from today they were breaking off cooperation with these people, and also asked her to tell them to leave the complex as soon as possible. Having sorted this out, Anna looked at Robert and, pointing toward the stairs, suggested that they talk in a calmer environment. The hero nodded and followed her. So a few minutes later, everyone was sitting at the table with aromatic tea. Anna praised Angelica's wonderful figure and appearance, saying that she had never seen such a person, although she had been in the sewing business for many years. The girl sitting opposite her lowered her head and modestly replied that Anna was exaggerating too much. Robert asked Anna to help them choose some suitable outfits for his companion. Anna called Maria over and said that they were real professionals in this kind of work. The consultant approached Angelica and asked her to follow her without looking in their direction. Robert noted that Anna grasps everything on the fly and knows how to find an approach to a person. The girls quickly got into the process of choosing clothes. Thus, the time slowly approached evening. The fitting came to an end only a couple of hours later, when the first stars began to appear in the sky. Anna thanked Robert for visiting her store and handed him a VIP membership card, which already had 5 yuan on it, and also warned him that in addition to this store, it could be used in other stores too. The hero accepted the card and thanked the girl. Immediately after this, he and Angelica left the store. Noticing that his girlfriend was deep in thought, he stopped in front of her and, waving his hand, asked what she was thinking about. Angelica shuddered in surprise and asked if all this was true, to which Robert, with a smile on his face, asked what she thought about it. Unhappy with the fact that she had been deceived all this time, the girl again rushed at the hero with her fists. She asked how he could deceive her all this time and pretend to be poor for 7 months. A couple of minutes later, having taken out all her anger on him, she sighed and asked discontentedly if he was now happy that he had deceived her, to which Robert replied in a guilty tone that just recently he really had no money. He was just lucky enough to invest well and hit the jackpot. Not believing his excuse at all, Angelica grabbed the guy by the shirt and asked how some investments could make Anna bend over backwards for them and how he could even treat her like that. All this time plotting behind her back and hiding his condition, considering her a complete fool. This would have continued for a long time if Anna's phone hadn't suddenly rang. The girl immediately let go of Robert and, answering the call, excitedly asked what had happened. The news she heard did not make her happy. Her friend was in trouble. After hearing the details, Angelica was perplexed and horrified. About 20 minutes later, the taxi pulled up to the building of a famous restaurant. The car had barely stopped when the passenger door opened. Angelica jumped out of it and, completely not hearing Robert's screams behind her, ran towards the entrance. Our hero had no choice but to follow her. He knew that Sophia was Angelique's best friend, so he understood the girl's reaction. But he also understood that her haste would not lead to anything good. Meanwhile, Angelica had already managed to reach the door and run into the hall. There she was suddenly seized. 2 girls instantly surrounded her from both sides, grabbing her by the arms. Angelica immediately recognized them and excitedly asked where her friend was. They smiled and said that there was something more important than Sophia right now. In this way, the girls walked to the tables. Upon seeing her classmate, Catherine greeted Angelica, saying that they hadn't seen each other for quite some time. The girls who brought Angelica here sat her down at the table, ignoring her questions about Sophia and saying that they had simply not seen each other for a long time. So they came up with a reason to invite her here. Pointing behind the girl, Catherine asked who the handsome guy was behind her, and if he was her boyfriend by any chance. Angelica was embarrassed by such a question and only now remembered that she did not come here alone. But Robert, unlike her, was not at a loss and, smiling, replied that he really was her boyfriend. Afterwards, he asked if he could join them, to which he received an approving answer from Catherine. Sitting down at the table, the hero couldn't help but notice the large number of dishes on the table. For some reason, he had a bad feeling about the girls' words about how they just wanted to chat with Angelica. All this time, Catherine did not take her interested gaze off him. Propping her head in her hands, she asked how he managed to win Angelique, assuming that he must be terribly rich. He smiled slightly and replied that it was self-evident. He understood from the very first minutes that they were just trying to rip them off and he wasn't going to fall for that. So he asked if they had eaten enough and asked his friend if she wanted to change places. Catherine and her sixes smiled wryly when she said that they had only just sat down at the table and could not leave so quickly. She wasn't going to let the couple go so quickly, at least not until Angelica paid for their table. Contrary to her expectations, Angelica told Robert that she had not eaten anything here, so they could leave. Here, Veronica intervened and plaintively asked how it was possible to leave without even trying a bun. Realizing that they couldn't leave so easily, Robert sighed and called out to a passing waiter, asking him to bring them menus. Veronica and Ksenia exchanged mocking glances, glad that he had fallen for their bait so quickly. Without even noticing them with their eyes, our heroes discussed the local menu. Taking advantage of this moment, Catherine quietly called her brother and said that she and the girls had come to eat at O's restaurant. Then she turned to Robert and Angela, asking if they minded if she stepped away for a while, to which he mockingly replied that he didn't mind, especially since someone was calling the others too. Thus, having received his approval, all three girls left the table, actively chatting about something on the phone, while Catherine wished the remaining heroes not to be bored without them. Half an hour later, all the girls' friends arrived and threw a real feast. Robert got up from the table and asked Angelica to wait there for him while he paid the bill. Catherine nodded her head approvingly, and putting her arm around the girl, said that she would look after Angelica during this time. Watching the hero head towards the cash register, she wondered if he would leave his girlfriend here or not, because if he left, Angelica would have to wash all the dishes here to work off the bill, which would be very beneficial to Catherine herself. Meanwhile, the administrators were quietly talking among themselves, discussing the third table, which had ordered only the most expensive dishes. Their conversation was interrupted by Robert, who approached. Counting all the dishes for all three tables, the girl reported that the total came to 1 fen, 3 li, and 200 mao. Taking a card out of his wallet, Robert asked how much it cost for all the tables in the room. To this, the girl replied that in addition to his 3 tables, there were 15 tables in the hall, and the entire hall came to 4 fen and 3 li. She didn't understand at all why he asked about the other tables too. The next moment, Robert placed his card on the terminal and said that he would pay for the other tables. He also added that he would give them a 5 fen tip. The restaurant managers were very shocked when they heard such a large amount for a tip, but they quickly came to their senses and, bowing low, almost hitting their foreheads on the surface of the table, thanked him for such mercy. When the loudspeaker announced to the guests that Mr. Robert Chain had paid for tonight's dinner and that their restaurant would provide its guests with a free dessert, Angelica and Catherine and the other girls were very surprised. Catherine didn't expect him to actually pay for all of it. She pursed her lips in frustration, thinking enviously about where Angelica had managed to snatch such a guy. Meanwhile, Robert had already returned to his friend and, helping her to get up, said that now it was time for them to go and do other things. She was actually pleasantly surprised that he decided not to save money but to pay for everyone. Watching the two of them head towards the exit, Catherine continued to burn with envy. When a waiter she already knew walked past her, she called out to him and asked him to come over. In just a moment, a new plan had already matured in her head on how not to let Angelica go unpunished. Looking at the waiter again, she said that Robert Chen had spent a lot of her money today and asked him to return it to her. In response to this, the man smiled and replied that they do not do refunds. He also said that Mr. Robert had not paid for her tables, and before leaving asked her to pass on a question, who allowed her to look down on people. The next moment, 2 belligerent security guards appeared behind the waiter, and he said that if Catherine refused to pay, they would be forced to take action. Having named the sum of 1 fen, 3 li, and 200 mao, he asked how she would pay, cash or card. Meanwhile, Angelica, who had gone outside, sighed resignedly and said that in the future they would skin her alive, which caused misunderstanding in Robert, who asked why she thought so since they had been friends before. Angelica ignored this question, and using her fists again, asked in bewilderment why he liked spending money so much and how much he had in total, to which the hero comfortingly replied that he had not spent that much, only 5 fen. Suddenly, a system message appeared in front of him informing him that he had received 5 points that could be exchanged for additional money, and the exchange function itself would be available once he had collected 10 points. Thinking about it, Robert came to the conclusion that since the ratio here was 1 fen to 1 point, he didn't have much left to spend. Suddenly, Angelica hit him on the leg, asking why he was frozen. Then she went forward, saying that he was responsible for today's dinner. Robert smiled and asked who else in this city could boast of having the richest chef, to which the girl grinned cheerfully and advised him to hurry up with the cooking. If he did everything well, he would even deserve the title of best chef. Suddenly, our hero's phone rang and the number of his friend Ivan appeared on the screen. Deciding that he might need help, Robert answered the call. However, contrary to his expectations, as soon as he answered the call, Ivan's cheerful voice rang out across the entire street, saying that he had dug up a way to make some money and asking where Robert was now. Soon, Ivan's car stopped nearby, having apologized and said goodbye to Angelica. The hero approached the car. Sitting in the front passenger seat, he inquired about the details of the project. Ivan smiled and admitted that the project was not actually his, but it was indeed a big deal. Then he asked if Robert had heard of an internet celebrity who had become very popular recently. Having received a nod from our hero, he told him that soon the Qigong Master's performance would be broadcast live and the team was looking for several guys who could deliver fake blows, after which they could receive as many as 8 lie. Disappointed by what he heard, Robert asked doubtfully if this was really the big project, to which Ivan cheerfully replied that it was certainly better than just sitting at home. The next moment, the guys jerked forward by inertia because someone cut them off. When Ivan opened the door and looked out, he saw that another car had crashed into them from behind. The disgruntled girl who came out of there asked with irritation in her voice who taught them to drive anyway. Ivan stepped forward and accused her of stepping on the gas and crashing into them. Looking back at the car, he noticed the BMW badge and was puzzled as to where this girl got the money for such a car. Christina had no intention of admitting her guilt, so she again attacked Ivan with the accusation that he should have known that it was forbidden to park anywhere in the city. Ivan responded with indignation in his voice that the traffic light was red, which meant that everyone had to stop. But the girl interrupted him, shouting that until he gave her 5 fen, he would not leave here. At this point, Robert intervened in their argument, saying that they should calm down because the police would arrive here very soon and sort things out completely. Now Christina's attacks were directed towards him, and just during this process, a man in uniform approached them and asked what was going on. Already puffing with rage, Christina pointed at Ivan and said that the two were driving too strangely, so she accidentally crashed into them and now they don't want to give her money for the repairs. Ivan in turn said that he was just standing and waiting for the traffic light to turn green. The policeman sighed and gestured for everyone to calm down. After examining the condition of the cars, he turned his gaze to Christina and said that the guys were standing at a red light and she crashed into them, and that he would like to look at her driver's license. This made the girl even more angry, and she shouted that even her car paint cost more than this wreck, so she should get her money back anyway. Interrupting her, the policeman again demanded her driver's license. When it turned out that she had neither a license, nor a passport, nor any identification with her, Robert and Ivan, who were standing nearby, began to quietly laugh at her. While pondering what to do in this situation, the policeman accidentally caught sight of Christina's shoes and noted with displeasure that, on top of everything else, she also drives in heels. He sighed wearily and turned around, asking them all to stay there and wait until he called the forensic scientist. As soon as the man left, Christina cast an irritated glance at the guys and muttered that they would regret what had happened. In response to these words of hers, the heroes only looked at each other cheerfully and shrugged their shoulders. Meanwhile, Christina called her boyfriend and complained about what had happened to her, asking him to come quickly. At that very moment, Robert's phone rang. When he saw Justin's name, he was very surprised, but decided to answer the call. Sitting in his office, the man happily greeted the guy and said that he heard that his girlfriend would be going to an event in 2 days. That's why Anna prepared a small present for her, and he himself can help if something happens. Stressed that news of this had reached Justin too quickly, the hero replied that it was just a small event, so there was no need for it. Then he asked how the man knew his number, since Anna didn't have his contacts, to which Justin replied that he was well acquainted with the head of the city, so he found out. Hearing this, Robert sighed heavily and, turning his gaze to Christina, asked the man if he could find out something. Justin listened to the guy's request and promised that he would sort everything out as soon as possible. When Christina heard Robert's voice telling someone that it would be a good idea to have her license revoked for life, she immediately frowned. Turning to him, she shouted that he was talking too much and that he shouldn't naively believe that his friends from the village could somehow help here, and as soon as her boyfriend arrived here, they would answer for everything. Worried by her words, Ivan suggested that Robert just leave quietly, but he shook his head and said that everything was fine. He just needed to wait a little. About 20 minutes later, someone's white car pulled up. At the sight of her, Christina immediately perked up and with a joyful smile on her face, she rushed towards her boyfriend. Paul muttered discontentedly under his breath as he got out of the car. He immediately noticed 2 guys standing nearby and furiously asked how they dared. Almost puffing with anger because he had to rush off so urgently and because of the situation in general, he shouted that he was one of the most influential people in the city, and no outsider dared to assert his rights here. Robert, standing with his back to him, immediately recognized his voice and a cheerful smile played on his lips. Turning to Paul, he said he was glad to see familiar faces here. Paul, recognizing Robert, froze in shock. All the man's former rage and irritation instantly disappeared and were replaced by confusion and awkwardness, because the events of this morning were still fresh in his memory. Robert also remembered everything perfectly, So he noted with a smile that fate was amazing, since they had accidentally met twice in one day. Laughing awkwardly, Paul replied that it was indeed a funny coincidence. Confused by her boyfriend's behavior, Christina clung to him and demanded that Paul quickly deal with these two idiots. Her words instantly enraged the man, and he demanded that she explain what was going on here. The girl stepped back and pointed towards the guys, explaining that they had stopped right in front of her and she had crashed into them. As soon as she said this, Paul gave her a loud slap in the face and asked in bewilderment if she had any idea how much the repairs would now cost him because of her stupidity. Watching the unflattering scene of the girl being beaten, the guys standing nearby were unpleasantly surprised that Paul was capable of such a thing, but they were in no hurry to intervene. As soon as the man took out his anger on the sobbing Christina, he glanced at Robert, wondering how he could handle this situation. Thinking about this, he took out 1 gold coin. Afterwards, he approached our hero and, smiling broadly, apologized for the trouble he had caused. As he said this, he held out a coin as compensation. Robert looked at the man in front of him in surprise, saying nothing. A few moments later, he simply turned around and headed towards the car, irritably remarking that he still had unfinished business. Paul was deeply shocked that his kind gesture was ignored in such a way. Hoping to mend fences, he called out to Robert and politely asked if he could speak to the store owner, Anna, again, as they had had a good relationship for a long time. Meanwhile, Justin was still in the office. Having called his man, he asked whether all the necessary information had already been checked. As soon as he heard that someone dared to harm Robert, he fell out of his chair from shock. The hero, at Paul's request, advised him to wait a little, and literally at that very moment the man's phone rang. After seeing Robert off, he took a call and irritably replied that he was very busy right now and could not talk. In response, an enraged Justin yelled at him because his BMW crashed into a very important person's car. Christina, who heard the entire conversation, flexed her fists and said in a threatening voice that Paul was finished. Our heroes watched the scene of the couple's showdown through a mirror. Perplexed, Ivan asked Robert what had just happened and why this man was so scared of him, and what the owner of the store had to do with it. Without taking his eyes off the phone screen, the hero replied that this was a person he had worked with before, and the fat man simply wanted to agree on cooperation, then added that he would now return his money. As soon as Ivan heard Robert's question about whether 5 mao would be enough for him, he almost lost control of the car from shock. The hero, frightened by the car suddenly pulling to the side, asked his friend if he really knew how to drive, to which he replied with bewilderment that he had previously given him only 1 or 2 mao, while Robert had given him as many as 5. But when asked about money, Ivan didn't answer, wondering where his friend could have gotten that kind of money. Robert sighed and asked Ivan to accept the money, since sooner or later it would come in handy anyway. Afterwards, he caught his displeased glance in the mirror, noticing the first habits of the rich, throwing money around left and right. Thus they rode on in silence, each thinking about their own things, until suddenly a system window appeared in front of our hero. It said that he currently had 55 points, and that each point could be spent on improving such characteristics as strength, speed, reaction, fighting ability, hearing, vision. Along with this, another window for enhancing characteristics appeared nearby. Robert was pleasantly surprised that he had managed to discover the possibility of strengthening in just half a day. Without thinking twice, he decided to invest all the points he had. Afterwards, he pressed the confirmation button, smiling broadly. Contrary to his expectations, the window that appeared only informed him that everything had gone well. At that moment, Robert was overcome with great disappointment and felt as if he had been deceived. Noticing his friend's change in mood, Yvonne worriedly asked what had happened. They spent the rest of the journey discussing their plans for the near future. The next morning, Robert came to the gym. At the entrance, he was met by Yana, the hall manager. As soon as she recognized the new visitor as Robert, her mood suddenly deteriorated. Habitually dialing Angelica's number, she said that she would call her here now, in response to which the hero replied that he had not come for this today and asked how much the subscription cost. Yana looked at him appraisingly, narrowing her eyes slightly, and asked how much money he had. To this, Robert replied that she shouldn't worry about that. Still doubting, the girl said that she would call a coach here, but if he didn't have enough money, then he would be in trouble later. A few minutes later, a joyful Alex, who works here as one of the trainers, ran out into the hall and asked with enthusiasm in his voice if anyone really wanted to buy a season ticket. When Yana gestured to the guy standing next to her, Alex stopped in bewilderment. He began to look around and asked where the gentleman she had told him about was. His words deprived Yana of the last drop of patience, and, hitting the tabletop with force, she asked in bewilderment how he could not see it. In response to her words, Alex grinned and said that he saw only a poor man here, who was always hanging around Angelica, but not a guest. Sighing, Yana irritably asked Alex whether he would accept it or not. Alex frowned with displeasure. He knew perfectly well that she liked it when everything went strictly according to the rules, so he couldn't lose face. Deciding to play along a little, he shrugged and said that he would accept Robert, since he had no other choice anyway, and also added that the hero's dependence on girls was starting to irritate him. Yana wanted to say something in reply to him, but suddenly Robert stepped forward, gesturing for her not to interfere. Afterwards, without taking his eyes off the coach, he said that if he didn't want to, he didn't have to accept him. There was absolutely no problem with that. He would just go to another club. Alex turned around, laughing loudly and waving goodbye, said that he had no need of such poor people. As soon as he went back into the hall, Yana sighed tiredly and asked if Robert would buy a subscription. The hero nodded in agreement and asked her to tell him more about them. The girl, referring to their long-standing acquaintance, decided to tell him everything and dedicated him to the fact that they have two types of subscriptions, regular and platinum, which have no time limit or limit on the use of exercise machines. When Robert said that he would take 4 platinum subscriptions, Yana was truly shocked and perplexed, because one such subscription cost 1 mao. Noticing her stupor, he pulled her cheek, bringing the girl to consciousness. She immediately attacked him furiously, shouting that he shouldn't make fun of her, because this year not a single person had been able to get this subscription. But here he wanted 4 at once. However, the next moment, a notification of successful payment of 4 mao arrived, causing Yana to freeze in place in shock once again. A couple of minutes later, she handed him 4 platinum cards at once. Now there was only surprise and interest in her eyes. She had heard rumors that he had sold his own house, but she didn't think it was really true. Having taken all the cards, Robert, with a joyful smile on his face, thanked Yana for her help and headed towards the locker rooms. 10 minutes later, he was already changed, and now, putting his clothes in the locker, he was thinking about the fact that Angelica was most likely training someone right now, so he shouldn't disturb her. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of him, telling him that he had received 40 points for spending 4 mao, and that the hero could use these points to increase his stats. A couple of minutes later, Robert came out into the hall. The first thing that caught his attention was the information board hanging at the other end of the room. Thanks to the enhanced characteristics, he was now able to see even what was written there. Having read that his girlfriend was ranked second to last in the gym's trainer rating list, he realized with resignation that this kind of work was definitely not for her. Suddenly, he was distracted from these thoughts by a female voice, to which he immediately turned around. In front of him, he saw a beautiful brunette who introduced herself as Lucia. So, the owner of the hall, she also shared that she had learned that Robert had purchased 4 platinum cards at once, so she decided to meet him personally. Shaking the hand extended to him, the hero said that he would like to take some individual lessons. He had heard her name before and knew that she had built the business from scratch on her own, so she deserved respect in his eyes. Having finished with the introductions, the owner of the club asked Robert to follow her. So a couple of minutes later, he was in Lucia's office, which she shared with her accountant, Sophia. Our hero and Lucia were sitting at a table with cups of coffee when the girl asked what classes he would be interested in. Robert explained that he was friends with the local trainer, Angelica, and would like to purchase her classes for 5 yuan. When she heard the price he had quoted, she asked him in surprise if he wanted to consider other trainers. Knowing that the limit of the lessons was usually 3 mao, Lucia was afraid that if Robert bought them for 5 yuan, Angelica would have to work for him for the rest of her life. So she asked if he was plotting something against this girl. The hero waved his palms in front of himself and convinced the owner of the club that he and Angelica were close friends and were on good terms, and also shared that his girlfriend was worried about her financial situation, so he decided to help her. Hearing this, Lucia breathed a sigh of relief and apologized for jumping to conclusions. She was extremely surprised by Robert's motives for spending 5 yuan just to make his girlfriend happy, and there was also a twinge of envy because her own monthly income was only 5 or 6 mao. The hero asked Lucia not to tell anything for now, but tomorrow, during the announcement of the performance results. The hostess of the hall accepted his request and asked if it would be convenient for Robert to join the chat. At the same time, 2 out-of-breath coaches emerged from the locker room hugging each other. Suddenly, Chris's phone received several messages saying that someone had just chosen a female trainer for 5 yuan. Without taking his eyes off the screen, The man asked Lily, who was standing next to him, if she had a new student, but she shook her head. Thinking about who got the newcomer, she assumed that it might be Angelica. Chris was thinking that if the client had chosen Angelica, then she must have been ready to do anything to get him. Coming to this conclusion, he decided that a little later he might also have a chance to finally get to her. Suddenly, Lily pressed herself more tightly against his arm and said with a pitiful expression that she needed this client. Smiling broadly, the man confidently said that she need not worry about it, because very soon this client would belong to them, and immediately after that he headed towards the hall. Angelica was putting the dumbbells back in place when she was suddenly called out. Chris, standing next to her with a phone in his hand, mockingly asked if she had already seen the message that a client had just paid 5 yuan for a lesson with a female trainer. Slowly approaching her, he said that he and Lily had already agreed that this client would go to her, but if Angelica wanted, she could have a drink with him this evening, and then, perhaps, she and Lily could share this rich man equally. Contrary to his expectations, the girl threw his hand off her shoulder and sharply replied that if the client chose Lily, then so be it. Chris, dissatisfied with her refusal, angrily shouted at her back that she was losing a lot and would soon regret it. When he saw that these words had no effect on her, he clicked his tongue in displeasure and, whispering that he had no other choice, decided to resort to radical measures. Suddenly, someone knocked on the office door, and Sophia immediately gave permission to enter. The guests did not keep them waiting long, and the next moment Lily and Chris rushed in, who said that he had heard that the client was giving 5 yuan for the job, and that Lily was ready to start. Sitting at the computer, Sophia adjusted her glasses and sternly replied that the 5 yuan had already been distributed. But Chris had no intention of giving up, and with a confident smile on his face asked who could take on this job other than him and Lily, the best trainers. Lucia, who had been sitting on the sofas all this time, irritably lowered her cup onto the saucer, drawing attention to herself. Then she cast a displeased glance at the 2 coaches and asked what they were even allowing themselves to do. Chris frowned slightly, trying to figure out what Lucia was doing here. Lily decided that she would have a better chance by approaching the owner directly and said that she would like to talk about the customer who paid 5 yuan. Chris, on the other hand, was horrified to realize that if the owner found out that this information had leaked, they would have to bear responsibility and lose their jobs, which he really didn't want. Listening to Lily, Lucia frowned even more and asked what the client's name was. Feeling the threat in his voice, the girl stepped back and, waving her hands in front of her, replied that she had forgotten his name, which brought relief to Chris, who was standing next to her. But she didn't stop there, and looking away, she said hesitantly that she had heard that he was a plump, middle-aged man. This infuriated Lucia even more. She slammed her palm on the table and shouted that they had never had such clients, after which she told the 2 to get out of here because she did not need such workers. Surprised, Lily asked if this was a joke, and Chris, realizing the danger of the situation, rushed to the girl and said in an apologetic tone that Lily had made a slight mistake, so there was no need to be so angry. He didn't want to get rid of this girl because she was a very good employee. At that moment, Lucia jumped up from her seat and shouted that she had come today to review the performance reports. She then reported that this client had chosen Angelica as his trainer and ordered the pair to leave the office immediately before they made her even more angry. Hearing that name, Lily gritted her teeth in displeasure. She couldn't let someone like her get that client. Therefore, the next moment, slamming the door, she hastily left the office. Meanwhile, Angelica taught Robert how to perform the exercise on the machine correctly. The enraged Lily, who had flown into the hall, instantly found her target and rushed at it with an angry cry. Angelica reacted quickly, turned around, and intercepted the girl's hand raised to strike. Afterwards, she asked Lily in surprise what was the matter. She pulled her hand away and asked in bewilderment how Angelica dared to touch her. But before she could do anything else, Robert suddenly grabbed her wrist. Here, Lily could no longer restrain herself and angrily shouted that if he dared to hit her, he would be immediately thrown out. But she didn't have time to finish, because the next moment he threw the girl over his back, causing her to hit the floor painfully. Afterwards, completely ignoring the crowd that had gathered around, he said that she was the one who started all this. At that very moment, Lucia entered the room and, attracting attention, shouted that she would like to clarify something. Pointing to Klaus standing behind her, she announced that from now on he and Lily would no longer work here because the 2 had been doing dirty deeds behind her back. She also congratulated Angelica on the fact that she is now acting as a private coach for 5 yuan and expressed hope that she will be able to fully express herself in this role. The girl standing next to our hero was very surprised by what she heard. Unlike Robert himself, on whose face there was a satisfied smile. Meanwhile, Lucia turned to Chris and ordered him to remove Lily from here. He silently took his unconscious girlfriend by the arm and headed towards the exit with her, hoping that they would have better luck at another club. As soon as they left, Angelica grabbed Robert by the ear and asked him in bewilderment what he was even thinking about, since she could buy an entire estate with that money. The hero was about to explain himself to her, but suddenly his phone rang. Taking out his mobile phone, he saw Anna Lynn's name appear on the screen. Angelica didn't calm down, saying that she had never seen people who spent such a huge amount of money on a fitness club. Pursing her lips, the girl decided to see if she could return the money to him, because she couldn't allow her friend to make a mistake one more time. Robert turned his gaze back to the screen, completely not understanding why Anna decided to call him. As soon as he answered the call, Anna informed our hero that Justin and a representative from the tech company would like to treat him to dinner, then told him the location of the meeting and asked if it would be convenient for him to meet. Since the meeting place was not that far away, Robert accepted the invitation. An hour later, he arrived at the hotel where dinner was to take place. The hero walked confidently towards the men in business suits standing by the window. In one of them, he recognized Justin without a doubt. The man standing next to him, Damien Min, was a big shot in the real estate business. Another man was no less a formidable and fearsome figure, Charles Hill, who owned the automobile industry. And the last one was Charlie Shu from the entertainment industry. Robert knew very well that these people were known as the 4 heroes of the province, who were the leaders in 4 industries, and he guessed that they were all gathered here for a reason. Suddenly, a man approached him from behind, and Robert recognized him as his former classmate. Leon also recognized him immediately, and smiling broadly, said that he was glad to meet him, since they had not seen each other since university. Robert smiled too and said that it was indeed an unexpected coincidence. When another man approached Leon, accompanied by 2 girls, he said that he had an appointment with Milena's family there. The girl who came forward, also a former classmate of Robert's, hesitantly greeted him, saying that she was glad to see him after so much time. Leon became even more inspired, and putting his arm around his old friend's shoulder, introduced his and Milena's former classmate, with whom they had studied business, to his uncle and aunt. Hearing this, the man and woman smiled contentedly. Olivia could not resist and praised the guys, saying that they were ambitious enough for their age. Unlike Leon, who happily accepted the praise and boasted about his friend's popularity, Robert frowned more and more. Having brought the conversation to the direction he needed, Leon deliberately loudly shared his worries about the fact that our hero had previously had to sell his own house to pay off all his debts. Now that Leon's goal was clear to him, Robert chuckled contentedly. Ignoring him, the hero turned to Milena and asked why she was here. She replied that she wanted to negotiate and get out of the business, then repeated his question, internally admiring how handsome he had become during this time. Before Milena could wait for an answer, she was suddenly grabbed by the arm. Olivia dragged her daughter along, saying that they still had a lot of things to do and they shouldn't keep the other guests waiting. And Leon continued to mock Robert. Assuming that our hero came here to get a job as a dishwasher, he offered his help in finding a job. Robert sighed and declined his offer, saying he came here to eat. Hearing this, Milena was delighted and, smiling, said that in that case he could go with them to the 2nd floor, which caused confusion in her mother. However, when the hero said that he needed to go to the 3rd floor, Leon's face showed surprise. But it didn't stay there for long, because literally the next moment his loud laughter spread throughout the hall, through which he asked Robert if he had made a mistake with the address, because they only pay about 5 fen for the 2nd floor. What can we say about the 3rd? Leaving the 2 guys, Milena, together with her parents, headed towards the stairs. The Chads were in a hurry to meet their guests because tonight's dinner would seriously affect their future. At the same time, Leon, trying to recover from his laughter, decided to give Robert some advice. He looked up at his old friend with a mocking look and told him that he should get out of here. The hero chuckled slightly and said that he also had a little advice for him. He cast the same mocking glance at Leon and said that it was he who should leave this place. His words made the guy furious, clenching his fists. He asked with indignation in his voice how Robert even dared to talk to him like that. When Milena advised him to watch his words, Leon turned around and angrily asked who exactly had helped her family organize a meeting with such an important person. Leaving them to sort things out among themselves, Robert walked towards the stairs, saying at the end that he didn't care at all about Leon's words. As soon as he heard these words, he became even more enraged, and without stopping for a moment, he threw various insults at our hero's back. At that moment, a man who was the director of the hotel, accompanied by 2 security guards, approached him and asked what was going on. An angry Leon pointed at Robert as he stood up and indignantly asked the man why he wasn't keeping an eye on his customers and demanded that the hero be thrown out of there because he had ruined his appetite. Philip turned his gaze to Robert and replied that he could not throw guests out without reason, then added that Leon shouted too loudly, which greatly disturbed his other guests. Leon, who was not appeased, shouted even louder, asking the man to look at Robert a little more closely and see that he was a beggar and did not look like his client at all. Then, almost puffing with anger, he turned to our hero, demanding that he leave in 5 seconds. To this, Robert replied that this was too much time. 3 seconds would be enough for him to throw Leon out of here, which only provoked his old friend even more. Suddenly, due to the noise below, Justin came out onto the stairs, accompanied by Anna and Charlie. Their appearance left Leon quite shocked, causing the Chad couple to freak out as he nearly fell to the floor. Meanwhile, Charlie came down to meet Robert and, holding out his hand, introduced himself, saying that he was the owner of this hotel and that he was very sorry that the reception was not so warm. Afterwards, he turned to his employees and sternly said that he was giving them 3 seconds to get rid of this source of noise. The hero, looking back, said that it was not worth it because the man had simply made an unfortunate joke. At the same time, Olivia moved a little closer to her daughter and excitedly asked why she had not warned them about the status of this young man. Michael, standing nearby, hissed at his wife, worried about getting into additional trouble for himself. Leon, realizing his defeat, hung his head dejectedly, and turning to the married couple, said that it was time for them to go to the guest as well. He could not understand at all how a poor man like Robert could be on good terms with such an influential person. Meanwhile, our hero was taken to a VIP room of the hotel that had been prepared in advance. There, Damien greeted him. He apologized to Robert for introducing himself only now. Once all the greetings were over, Charlie invited him to sit down at the table. The hero sat down on the chair that had been pulled out for him and said with a hint of admiration that he had heard about the reputation of the 4 of them before, but he had never even thought that he would have the honor of meeting them. Charlie laughed loudly and said that they weren't that great. Justin smiled contentedly. He liked the fact that Robert already knew about the 4 because it made it more likely that he would show more favor to them. Meanwhile, Charlie said that their reputation was nothing compared to our hero. Damien chose to watch from the sidelines, thinking that if it weren't for Justin, they wouldn't have known about this rather difficult guy. Anna, who joined the conversation, suggested that they first eat and then move on to more important topics, especially since she had long wanted to have a drink with Robert. But our hero objected to this proposal, stopping the girl with a gesture. Meeting her blank look, he explained that alcohol would only hinder the negotiations. He was already impatient to find out why such influential people had asked to meet with him. Justin didn't mind getting straight to the point, so he spoke first. But he was interrupted by Robert, who, after taking a sip of water, said that today they would have a lot to discuss concerning today's big personalities. Then he abruptly put the glass down on the table, saying that he liked to speak directly, so he advised the men present that if they had something to say, they shouldn't beat around the bush. Anna nodded in agreement and, looking at Damien, said that Robert was a very smart man, so they could drop the formalities and talk openly. The man sighed and said that in that case he would start. He then said that last year a large land company had been engaged in the liquidation of a number of real estate companies, and since his own company T was the leading one in the province, they were forced to defend themselves. But due to sharp jumps in stock prices, their income has fallen sharply and the company may soon find itself in the red. Therefore, if he cannot find investors, then not only he but others will have problems as well. Taking the man's words to their logical conclusion, Robert asked if this meant that they wanted to ask him for help. Damien knew about our hero's fairy tale state, so he was his last chance for salvation. He told Robert that they had a way to change the situation, but they needed 10,000 yuan to do it. The hero was studying the contents of his cup with disinterest when he said that he had such a small thing, but in return, he had a counteroffer. Hearing this, Damien jumped up from his seat in shock. Robert gave him a dark look. Afterwards, he said that since they were in such disorder, he could take control of the situation. These words greatly surprised Charlie too. Justin, frowning, asked Robert in confusion if he meant to say that he was going to control T's company. Our hero smiled contentedly, saying that it was an equal exchange. He gives them money and they give him power. His proposal to run everything from behind the scenes left everyone shocked and perplexed. Damien, pursing his lips in displeasure, thought about the fact that in order for them to take control of the situation, they would need about 17,000. Although he understood that Robert's offer would save their situation from collapse, It was still too risky to trust the company's affairs to a stranger. Sensing their doubt, the hero sighed and, taking out his phone, asked to be given the company's bill. Once his request was fulfilled, he transferred 100,000 yuan. Everyone gathered there watched with bewilderment in their eyes as a transfer with such an incredible amount arrived in Damien's account. Watching them, Robert smiled slightly, thinking that for him it was only 100,000, for which he would receive points and easily return this amount in the future. His thoughts were interrupted by a system message that suddenly fell on his head. The message suggested that our hero was deliberately accumulating points, which is why only 1,000 points were awarded, and Robert was very unhappy that his plan was discovered so quickly. He wondered why he had not been told about all the details earlier, because then he would not have spent so much money. Suddenly, he was pulled out of his not-at-all happy thoughts. Looking at the men standing in front of him, he realized that the time had come for an answer. All three bowed at the same time, saying that from that moment on, they became his subordinates. To these words, Robert replied that they were being too polite, because now they were in the same boat. Soon, food was brought to them. Holding a glass of red wine in his hand, the hero thought that if they all worked together, they could even reach Lake Dao. Each of those present knew that it was in this lake that the entire savings of the country were kept, so they shuddered in surprise and looked uncertainly at the guy in front of them. But before doing anything, Robert said that they should think it over carefully. At the same time, he thought about the points awarded to him. Just when he was thinking about adding stats, he received a message that 1,500 points had been added to his strength, and Robert dropped the glass from his hand in surprise. The fragile glass shattered into many pieces when it hit the floor surface. An agitated Anna jumped up from her seat and asked Robert if everything was okay. He replied that he had dirty hands, so he would go to the restroom for a while. As soon as he began to stand up, leaning on the edge of the tabletop, the wood under his palm instantly became covered with deep cracks. The next moment, the table cracked into pieces. The men jumped back and stared in bewilderment at the broken table, which was made of the finest wood. They slowly raised their wary gazes to Robert, deciding that he was thus warning them. Going to the restroom, the hero rinsed his face with cool water and, looking at himself in the mirror with a satisfied smile, thought that the money was well spent. Not only did his strength increase, but his speed and perception increased as well. With his eyes closed, relying only on his hearing, he was able to catch a fly flying near him. With the enhanced features, Robert was able to hear better than ever. He could even overhear the conversation between the Chad family. Meanwhile, Michael was trying to understand why Pavel, with whom they had already made an agreement, told others about their problems. The man, hearing such an accusation against him, chuckled and said that Michael must have substantial evidence, otherwise he could sue him for slander. Besides, they had already discussed this before. Milena hesitated uncertainly and, looking down, said that she would not drink with him. Sitting next to Pavel, who was starting to get irritated, Leon poured more wine for the man and told him that he shouldn't get excited and offered to buy him boilers for half price. His proposal did not interest Pavel at all, so the next moment he threw him and his chair aside. Afterwards, he stood up from his seat and asked with displeasure why they had come here empty-handed and why they couldn't even put two words together. He frowned and looked at the Chad family and said that this was the end for them. Suddenly, a brilliant idea came to him, and he suggested that they sell Milena to him, and then, perhaps, they could save the situation. But such a proposal only horrified the girl herself and her mother. As the man was about to approach them, someone grabbed his arm, stopping him. Looking at Pavel, Robert said that perhaps he would be able to cheer him up instead of Milena. The man abruptly pulled his hand away, asking the stranger in bewilderment who he was and how he got here in the first place. Leon, who recognized him, rose from the floor and looked at the hero with hatred, shouting at him to get out of here. But Robert didn't answer him. He just gave him a cold, contemptuous look. Then he turned his attention to Milena and said that he heard everything, so she shouldn't go with Pavel. To avoid any questions, he added that from now on the Chad family would deliver their chickens to the hotel at double the price. Milena was sure that Robert was not lying and that he could be trusted, so she was very happy that her family's problem was finally solved. At this point, Pavel intervened, telling the hero that his words sounded too loud and arrogant, because first he would have to get permission from the hotel itself for this. Leon and Pavel cast hateful glances at the guy, wanting him to get out of here as quickly as possible. But when there was no reaction from Robert, Pavel switched to threats, promising to get rid of him if he did not get out of his way, at which point other guests entered the room. Hearing someone's displeased voice asking Pavel who he was going to get rid of, the man immediately turned around, irritably asking who else they were. However, as soon as he recognized those who entered and who were looking at him angrily, he immediately hesitated. Trying to understand what they were doing here, Pavel did not react in any way to Charlie's approach. He struck the man in the face with a powerful blow without a drop of pity. Robert and Milena were not very surprised by what was happening, unlike the latter's parents, who watched this scene with horror and bewilderment. Leon, who was standing to the side, was overcome by a strong shudder of fear. He had absolutely no idea what was going on here and why all these people had come here. When Robert got tired of watching Pavel being beaten, he sighed and said that enough was enough. Charlie listened to him and let the man go, then took out a handkerchief and wiped his palms. Bowing respectfully to our hero, he asked what was going on here. The hotel owner's polite treatment of Robert left Leon in deep shock. Pavel was no less stunned than he was. This contrast in Charlie's behavior greatly strained the man, because just a moment ago he was ready to kill him, and now he was bowing his head to some guy. Realizing that Robert was probably the son of someone very influential, he realized that he had been wrong to talk to him in that tone. As soon as our hero told about the current situation, Charlie said that everything would be as Robert wanted, because the hotel has quite a lot of branches, and several thousand chickens can easily be sold in a day. Then he turned to Milena and with a smile on his face handed her his business card. Once that question was settled, Charlie asked Robert what he should do with Pavel and Leon standing behind him. The first one collapsed to the floor in horror as the hero began to slowly approach him. Sitting down next to him, Robert, with a false smile, warned him that if the man decided to mock the Chad family again, he would die immediately. Afterwards, he ordered Charlie to get rid of the two and, accompanied by Anna, Justin, and Damien, left the hall. Milena watched the guy go, hoping that one day she would be able to repay him for his help today. Sometime later, our hero left the hotel, where Ivan was already waiting for him, informing him that the work he had spoken about last time would begin this evening. Robert, heading for the driver's door, said that they needed to get a bite to eat somewhere first. When he abruptly pulled the door towards himself, practically completely tearing it away from the body of the car, Ivan shuddered in surprise and amazement. The hero was horrified by the thought that he could not properly control his superhuman strength. Crying with grief, Ivan grabbed his friend by the shirt and asked what he was doing, because it was a rented car and its repairs would cost him a pretty penny. When Robert suggested that they simply buy a new car, Ivan began to cry even harder and asked where he would get the money for a new one. Then the hero handed him 1 yuan and asked if it was enough. His friend froze for a moment in shock at the sight of this money. Ivan, smiling happily, replied that that would be enough. A little later, Robert contacted Justin and asked for help in choosing a suitable car. The man admitted that he knew little about cars and advised him to contact Charles. Thus, while waiting for Charles to arrive, our heroes decided to take a walk around the salon, where a young girl immediately approached them and said that she could help them with their choice. Following his friend hesitantly, Ivan asked him if he was really going to buy a car. Robert laughed and clapped Ivan on the shoulder, asking what was wrong with that, especially since it was his fault that he had suffered losses. Ivan could not help but notice that the hero was too kind to him, not only giving him a car, but also money. So in the name of old friendship, he promised himself not to let him down. With these thoughts, he enthusiastically shouted out that in that case, he would not be modest and would choose a cool car. After inspecting several cars, Angelina led the guy to the recreation area. The girl brought them coffee and asked them to wait here a little while she prepared the contract. A joyful Ivan admitted that he never imagined that he would ever buy a car straight from the showroom. Robert gave him a friendly nudge, saying that when he was still a poor man, it was Ivan who helped him. Suddenly, someone's loud, disgruntled cries attracted the attention of the friends. Angelina angrily advised the 3 visitors standing in front of her that they should wait their turn. When another female consultant objected, she replied that her client had arrived first. Edgar sighed in irritation and said that they should know how valuable his time was and end this circus. Claire turned to her client and, apologizing for this, asked him to wait a little while she sorted everything out. Then she approached Angelina and angrily said that she should keep a better eye on the list, because the Dior R8 car is far from cheap and not everyone can afford it. The girl standing to the side also decided to intervene. She swung and gave Angelina a stinging slap when she tried to object again. Afterwards, she indignantly asked how she dared to open her mouth in their presence. Warming up her hand for another blow, Mirabelle, with a haughty smile on her face, warned the consultant that if she dared to interfere again, she would teach him a harsher lesson about who could be contradicted and who could not. At that moment, Robert approached the crying Angelina and handed her a napkin. Turning his gaze to Mirabelle, he asked her if she really thought that one Dior car would be beyond his means. His question brought a mocking smile from Edgar, who said that the only thing Robert could afford was a grocery cart. Taking her boyfriend's hand, Mirabelle, looking at the hero, asked if he even knew who was in front of him. The second son of the owner of the pharmaceutical company C, Edgar Lopez. Robert chuckled and replied that he had heard of such a company. It was known for selling various fakes. These words made the company's heir laugh. Stepping forward, he asked Robert if he was all right in the head or if he was just being too bold. His tone instantly changed to annoyance, and he shouted that no one dared to speak to him like that. Ivan, standing behind him, rolled up his sleeves and asked Edgar, no less irritated, what he was doing. Even though he was a poor man, he couldn't allow someone to treat his friend like that. At the very height of the brewing fight, a man in a business suit and glasses ran into the hall. Once Claire told him everything, Richard, siding with Edgar, explained that he was a privileged customer, so if Robert wanted to buy a car, he would have to wait or go to another dealership. After listening to him, the hero clicked his tongue in displeasure. He didn't want to resort to radical measures, but the situation forced him to do so. These words irritated Mirabelle, and she stepped forward, raising her hand to slap him, asking what a poor man like him could do. It was no trouble at all for Robert to intercept her wrist. The girl tried to pull her hand away, but when she failed, she screamed for him to let go immediately and raised her other hand to strike. Robert was not going to tolerate her attacks, so he was the first to kick her in the stomach. Because he misjudged his force, Mirabelle flew to the other end of the hall. Those present looked at the girl lying on the floor with horror and surprise. Quickly turning his gaze to Robert, Edgar angrily shouted that he was giving him 5 seconds to get on his knees and apologize. Otherwise, he would regret being born. In response to this, the hero showed him the finger and said that if he wanted an apology so much, then let him make him do it. Robert couldn't even imagine that with 1,500 points invested in strength, he would be able to throw the man so far away. Edgar accepted his challenge and, taking his phone out of his jacket pocket, said threateningly that now he would show him that it was not worth interfering. Claire helped Mirabelle up from the floor, and as the girls approached, the latter asked Edgar to urgently call Uncle Julian. At that moment, Ivan came up to him and whispered that the situation was getting tense and they should leave here. Robert shook his head and replied that it would be too easy to leave here, and they couldn't just abandon Angelina. Afterwards, he stepped forward, taking out his phone, and said that he would solve everything so they didn't have to worry. He knew that Julian Fay was Charlie's subordinate, so he decided to find out more about it. Meanwhile, Claire continued to defend Mirabelle, saying that soon our heroes would have no time for jokes. Pointing to her colleague standing near her clients, she shouted that as soon as Edgar sorted everything out, she would be fired from her job. Robert turned his gaze from the screen to his friend and recalled his words earlier about how they would not leave Angelina alone even after they left. During this time, Edgar managed to contact his uncle and tell him about what happened, asking him to come. After finishing the conversation, he glanced at the guys sitting on the couch with a mocking grin and said that it didn't matter who they were going to call, but they wouldn't be able to hide from his uncle. Putting the phone back into his inside pocket, Robert smiled and said that they didn't need it. He would just wait for his uncle to arrive. About half an hour later, several tinted cars pulled up to the entrance of the salon. From there, Julian emerged, accompanied by a dozen armed subordinates. Upon seeing his uncle, Edgar immediately perked up and pointed towards Robert and Ivan, saying that these two were his offenders and asked that they be gotten rid of immediately. After listening to his request, Julian frowned and looked menacingly at his nephew. The next moment, he grabbed his nephew by the jacket, pulling him towards himself and hit him hard in the stomach with his knee. Mirabelle instantly sat down next to her lover and looked angrily at the man, asking what he was doing. Julian ignored her and snapped his fingers, ordering his men to teach them a little lesson. The next moment, the painful cries of Mirabelle and Edgar began to be heard throughout the salon, begging for mercy. Robert watched this scene with a happy smile on his face, unlike the shocked Ivan standing next to him. Edgar, kneeling in front of Julian with tears in his eyes, asked in a puzzled tone why those two had done wrong, but he was the one getting it. In response, the man kicked his nephew again, sending him flying to the side, and said that he didn't need to understand anything because it wasn't that important. Mirabelle winced as Edgar collapsed unconscious on the floor. Looking at Julian with bewilderment and displeasure, she asked if he really had any problems with his head, since instead of helping, which is why he was called here, he was crippling them. These words seriously enraged the man. Throwing a murderous glance at her, He said that she should have kept quiet and not interfered. When he told his boys that he was leaving Mirabel in their hands, they were greatly encouraged. He himself returned to Edgar again, grabbed him by the head and slightly raised him. He advised him to listen to him very carefully. Afterwards, he explained to his nephew that he had provoked a very important person, for which he was receiving a well-deserved punishment, and his future fate would directly depend on his behavior. A few minutes later, Edgar and Mirabel were lying on the floor, badly battered and beaten, unable to even move. Once they were dealt with, Julian headed towards Robert. Shocked, Ivan quietly said that this man was clearly not simple. After what he had seen, he was afraid that Julian would now take them on too. This assumption slightly amused Robert. Smiling, he assured his friend that no one was going to beat them. The next moment, Julian bowed down along with his men and apologized for the trouble they had caused. Immediately after that, he pointed towards the worried Claire and the salon director and asked what to do with these two. Robert replied that this girl was taking too many liberties and asked to deal with her thoroughly. She didn't have to wait long for this request to be fulfilled. Almost instantly, two thugs approached her and dragged the resisting Claire towards the exit. Ivan never ceased to be surprised by what was happening here, and, approaching Robert, quietly asked why this man was listening to him, to which the hero replied that this was far from all. Before Ivan could ask another question, his eyes widened again in surprise. Charles Hill, a bigwig in the automobile industry, was walking quickly towards them. When the man, excited by the long-awaited meeting, rushed past the salon director, he panicked. Stopping in front of Robert, Charles shook his hand with a joyful smile on his face, apologizing for his lateness. In response, the hero also smiled and said that he had arrived just in time. His friendly smile instantly turned into a gloomy expression as he turned his gaze to Angelina standing next to him and asked what had happened here. Under the man's heavy gaze, the girl told everything. As soon as she finished, Charles nodded approvingly, and looking again at Robert, asked what he would say about her words. After thinking for a moment, he replied that in general everything was as she said, but she softened some things, then pointed to the director, who had fallen to the floor in horror, and quoted his words about how in order to buy a car he had to either wait or leave. When the man, kneeling down, began to apologize for his misdeed, Charles interrupted him, telling him to get out of there immediately. After that, two more of Julian's boys carried all the culprits out. Julian came out and said reproachfully that they should not have messed with his master and threatened that if he saw them here again, it would be the end of them. When one of his boys asked who this Robert was, Julian kicked him in the leg and angrily shouted at him not to dare speak so disrespectfully about his master. Meanwhile, a worried Angelina asked what would happen to her. Charles replied that she could continue working and asked her to leave them because he needed to talk to their guests. As soon as the girl fulfilled this request, the man offered the hero his help in choosing a car. Robert gratefully agreed to his proposal. Sometime later, after all the models presented to him, our hero settled on two cars. He considered them to be good enough options and decided to take them. As soon as all the formalities were settled, Charles, who was tired of finding out what this lad was like in a different setting, inquired about his plans for the evening and invited him to dinner. Robert apologized, saying that he had things to do and suggested that they sit another time, and then got into the car and said that as soon as he drove away this car, he would come a little later for the second one. Immediately after this, he set off, leaving the confines of the salon. The man frowned, thinking that Robert was not particularly pleased, which could affect further cooperation, so he decided to talk to the others about this. Meanwhile, Ivan tried to ask his friend about when he managed to rise so high and why such influential people obeyed him. Robert chuckled and jokingly replied that maybe he just became a feng shui master. He then added that he ultimately changed the fate of 4 rulers, which is already one of the reasons to start respecting him. Ivan sincerely admired his friend's skill in deceiving the rich, but advised him not to provoke them too much. Otherwise, they might kill him. Thinking over everything that had happened over the last couple of days, he came to several conclusions for himself. The hero replied that Ivan didn't have to worry about him, and now it was time for him to do some extra work. Sometime later, they arrived at the right place where the concert was currently taking place. Looking at the huge crowd, Robert asked Ivan in bewilderment how much money he thought they spent on this show, to which he happily replied that he was not interested, because he came here only to earn money. It was Marcus's first time at an idol concert, so he was pleasantly surprised by the girls' precise and synchronized movements. When he said that it was very convenient to hold a couple of concerts and get a lot of money from this whole crowd of idiots, Ivan shrugged his shoulders and said that there weren't that many such capable girls, so this was a fairly standard situation. Giving his friend a friendly nudge, the hero advised him to cool down a bit, otherwise his future bride would not be thrilled with his dark past. At that moment, one of the organizers approached them and said that their performance was coming up soon, then explained that the guys would have to go on stage and make just a couple of hand gestures and then just fall down. A couple of minutes later, a car parked near the stage. Out came a gray-haired man who was a master of Qigong, Nikolai Noel, known as the strongest practitioner of Tai Chi. Under the gaze of the cheering crowd, he headed towards the stage. As soon as he got up, he clasped his hands behind his back and said in a deep, bass voice that today he, a Tai Chi practitioner, had come to demonstrate his strength, and recently someone on the internet had encroached on his authority. So he decided to strengthen it in this way and dispel all doubts. Robert, who was in the crowd, noticed the man's age and said that it would be more appropriate for him to sit at home with his grandchildren. Ivan, who was standing nearby, nodded in agreement and then added that it shouldn't bother them because they were only here for the money and nothing more. Meanwhile, Nikolai continued, saying that although he could not directly say what the true strength of practitioners was, he could show it. The hero was already getting tired of his speeches and, yawning, he asked Ivan how soon it would be their turn, since this was a group performance and they were the 7th and 8th numbers, to which he replied that he didn't know. Half an hour later, Nikolai had already finished his speech and was now fighting with his third opponent. Once he had defeated him in a matter of seconds, he turned to the crowd again, saying that as soon as he entered the fight, his inner strength immediately shook his opponents, and then asked the next 4 people to stand up. Our heroes were openly laughing the whole time, realizing how stupid this whole production looked from the outside. When numbers 5 through 8 were told over the earpiece to come on stage, Robert was delighted. He was already tired of languishing in anticipation of his debut. A minute later, he went up on stage with 2 more guys and a belligerent Ivan, and calling out to the man with a mocking voice, reminded Nikolai of the words he had said earlier about how he could handle anyone. The Qigong master turned to them and immediately assumed a defensive attacking stance, saying that no matter where or how the blows came from, he would deal with everyone even with his eyes closed. Hearing his answer, Robert chuckled and said that in that case he would not hold back. Ignoring the scriptwriter's words about what exactly he needed to do, he rushed at Nikolai with his fist raised to strike. However, he fell on the stage before our hero's fist even reached him. The other 3 guys froze in place in shock. Suddenly, Ivan had a wonderful idea. With a satisfied smile on his lips, he moved towards the old man and, rolling up his sleeves, said that he would not miss the opportunity and stay away. After this, he began to actively strike the completely unresisting opponent. Robert, standing behind him, asked his friend in bewilderment what he was doing, since Nikolai had already fallen a long time ago, to which he replied that it was a live broadcast and he needed to take advantage of this rare chance to become famous. Suddenly, a loud voice called out to them, announcing that the broadcast had been interrupted. The guy who came out on stage was terribly angry and indignantly asked our heroes what they were doing here and why they started fighting for real. Robert, without a drop of guilt in his voice, answered that Nikolai fell himself. He didn't even have time to touch him, then added that since this old man is one of the top 10 Qigong masters, he shouldn't be so weak. Even a fool would see through their lies. Wilhelm laughed at his words, asking Robert what kind of nonsense he was talking about, and then explained that the old man was just an actor. He pointed towards the crowd of worried spectators, saying that all his punches were also just a game. Their purpose was to increase the flow of viewers. Having explained everything, Wilhelm stated that they were obliged to pay him as compensation for the ruined show. Robert ignored his words and reached for the phone lying nearby. Noticing this, an irritated Wilhelm asked what he was up to. The hero grinned and replied that he had recorded everything that happened here completely by accident. Immediately after this, to confirm his words, he turned on a recording in which Wilhelm admits that it was all just acting. Wilhelm's irritation quickly turned to horror and confusion. He had not foreseen such a situation and was afraid that it would be used against him in the future. Robert turned off the recording and said that he acknowledged his desire to make money, but doing it on a helpless old man was too much. Clicking his tongue in displeasure, Wilhelm motioned to his guys, saying that our heroes shouldn't have interfered in his affairs. Almost immediately, 3 pumped-up thugs came up on stage. When they stopped behind him with menacing grins, he said that it would not be so easy to leave now. While his boys were flexing their fists, Wilhelm ordered Robert to go into the gallery and remove everything. Seeing how serious the jocks were, our heroes involuntarily tensed up. While Robert was frantically thinking about what to do in such a dangerous situation, Ivan decided that the correct tactic was to attack first. Under the puzzled gaze of our hero, he boldly rushed at one of the men, but the latter quickly intercepted his fist. Realizing that he couldn't handle him, Ivan looked at Robert and shouted at him to run. However, the next moment the two remaining jocks were thrown aside. Then our hero dealt with the last one, holding Ivan with just one kick to the stomach. Ivan was greatly shocked by what had happened and the monstrous strength of his friend. While everyone was in a stupor and the jocks were knocked out, Robert decided to take advantage of this opportunity and ran away from there, grabbing Ivan by the hood. Running further and further away from the crowd, Ivan, still in shock, asked the hero where he had managed to learn to fight so well. At this, Robert smiled and reminded him that he had previously suggested going to the gym and training together. Thus, discussing the usefulness of training, they continued on their way. Meanwhile, Nicholas, who was in his room, was indignant about what had happened to him. The girl sitting next to him, looking through the papers, said that the media had connected immediately after the live broadcast, and local authorities were already dealing with the issue of fraud, so if this issue was not resolved soon, the company's shares would suffer. Suddenly, at that moment, Wilhelm entered the room and said that they still had a chance to get out of this, and also to increase their popularity several times over. Then he looked at Nikolai and said that only their great master Chin could do this. The man quickly understood what he was getting at and suggested that he could make a statement that they had been attacked suddenly, and that through his own carelessness he had fallen into the trap of those scoundrels. He also believed that those two should be properly punished. A few minutes later, Wilhelm left Nikolai and headed to the director's office. A worried Amelia asked him what they would do if the video leaked online and suggested that they seek help from higher-ups. The guy himself understood that they would not be able to sort this out on their own, and that he would have to take extreme measures. Reaching for his phone, he assured his assistant that she should not worry about it. Meanwhile, sitting in her spacious office, Victoria received all the information about what was happening from her interlocutor via video call. She didn't like what she heard, especially the information that Wilhelm admitted on the video that they were deceiving everyone. Her interlocutor was in a real panic, because now they are under incredible pressure, and they do not know what to do. They simply have no other choice but to turn to her for help. Victoria sighed in irritation and, rising from her seat, said that she would try to sort out this situation. After ending the call, she approached the subordinate standing at the door and ordered him to immediately find out information about the location of the guy who currently has the video. At the same time, our heroes moved to a busy street, where they decided to have a snack at one of the street stalls. They had barely started their dinner when someone's car stopped near them. The next moment, the front window rolled down a little and the girl sitting there asked Robert to get into the car because they needed to talk about something. Surprised, Ivan asked his friend if he knew this rich beauty. The hero ignored his question and, deciding that this was a new kind of showdown, answered the girl that he was not going to do this because he was currently busy with dinner and did not have time for conversation. Irritated by his answer, Victoria's subordinate jumped out of the car, abruptly opening the door, asking Robert what he was even allowing himself to do. But the girl opened the door a little and stopped him, saying that perhaps the boy was right, and that to solve such matters one had to be patient and determined. Afterwards, she walked outside with her arms folded across her chest. Turning to Robert, she said she would get straight to the point and asked him to name the price he wanted to receive for the ransom of the video. The hero knew that the Claude family was one of the most influential in the city, and that its head worked in the entertainment industry. So he boldly assumed that since a representative of such a wealthy family decided to personally deal with the issue, she was familiar with Nikolai. Victoria sat down opposite him and, smiling, said that since he knew her, things would go much faster. Then she handed him a blank check and asked him to write down the amount he wanted. When he asked if he could indicate any amount, Victoria replied that she could enter as much as she wanted, but if he refused to sell the video, she would have to use other methods. Robert smiled and said that in that case he agreed. The girl watched the guy with a confident smile, glad that everything had gone so easily and that her father had been worried about her abilities in vain, since it was obvious that people like him had no power, no influence, no money, and it would not be difficult to bribe him. As soon as our hero finished, he handed her the completed check. Smiling, Victoria, without looking at the paper, took the check and said that she was glad that Robert had actively made contact. Having said this, she looked down at the check in her hand to see how much he had requested. However, as soon as she saw the 990,000 written there, her eyes widened in shock. She looked at Robert, frowning, and asked if this was a joke. In response to this, the hero tore out the check with chopsticks and asked if they really couldn't afford such a small change. Without waiting for Victoria's answer, which was obvious enough for him, he said with a grin on his face, disappointed that she had not been able to live up to his expectations. So the next moment he tore the check in half. This action irritated the girl, causing her to jump from her seat. The guard rushed at Robert, saying that he was asking for his death, but our hero had no trouble intercepting his hand. Deciding he needed to get tough, he placed the man's hand on the table and raised his chopsticks over it, causing his victim to look horrified. Without a moment's hesitation, he suddenly thrust the sharp end of the sticks into the guard's hand, driving them all the way to the table leg and causing the man to scream in wild pain. Victoria, who was watching this scene, involuntarily tensed up, amazed by the strength and cruelty of this boy. Robert, taking out the bloody sticks, said that the Claude family was trying to appropriate something that did not belong to them at all. Then he let go of the guard's hand, allowing him to fall to the ground, and with a mocking voice asked Victoria if she had brought people on purpose because she didn't have much money of her own. The girl's face distorted with displeasure when she realized that she had greatly underestimated him. Robert, not wanting to waste any more time here, patted his friend on the shoulder, saying that they had not finished their meal, so he suggested going to a more secluded place. Watching the two fool around, Victoria promised herself that she would not let it go and would definitely make Robert regret deciding to go against her family. Meanwhile, our hero recalled that once, at the beginning of their acquaintance, they had meat in a pot and suggested visiting this establishment again to indulge in nostalgia. A few days later, Nikolai, having put on a couple of bandages for the image, went live, where he described the situation to everyone from his side, as previously planned. This video got a lot of likes and comments, but even so, it didn't change the situation at all. Indignant that some guy would dare to encroach on his family's honor, Sam threw the phone aside. Sam was the youngest member of the Claude family and was very affected by the whole situation. Turning to his sister, who was calmly sipping her coffee, he asked in bewilderment what was wrong with her that she couldn't carry out such an easy task and hush up the matter. At this point, the man sitting at the table intervened and sternly said that if Sam had been sober that day, his sister would not have had to get involved in these matters. Moreover, their problems would only increase if he decided to interfere now. Hopper Claude was the head of the company, so he could look at this situation more calmly and balanced. After scolding his wayward son, he noted that if Sam continued to behave like this, he would never be able to gain his grandfather's approval. Feeling her responsibility, Victoria stood up and, bowing her head, apologized to her father for her failure. In response to this, the man only sighed wearily and advised them both to quickly turn on their brains so as not to get into such troubles again. After pushing back his chair, he stood up and walked out from behind the table. He didn't expect much from them, so he asked them to just not disappoint their grandfather. Victoria clenched her fists in displeasure, because even though their family had not lost anything, considerable damage had still been done to their reputation. She irritably crushed the phone screen with her heel, deciding that she could do without this actor. At the same time, our hero, together with Angelica, was heading to an important event for her. On the way, the girl was cheerfully discussing Nikolai's live broadcast. Reaching for the guy's cheek, Angelica told him that Ivan had already blabbed to her about everything and asked how long ago they had planned this. Robert brushed off her questions, asking her not to distract him while he was driving. He didn't like the fact that his opponents started to massively launch live broadcasts, which helped restore their reputation. But everyone began to condemn his own video, although there were some advantages, because this video managed to become a trend. Thanks to Charlie and his popular app, he was able to get the video so much publicity. But in the end, Wilhelm's team settled this issue too. The only thing he didn't understand was why the Claude family was inactive. He had a hard time believing that they had decided to give up. Having spent the rest of the journey thinking like this, he soon parked at the right building. Getting out of the car, Angelica said that it was just her classmate's birthday, so he didn't have to accompany her. But remaining with his opinion, Robert silently followed his friend. He couldn't help but worry about her, so he tagged along. At the entrance, Angelica was met by the hero of the occasion, Vanessa, dressed in a white dress that emphasized her figure. Robert slowly approached the girls while his friend congratulated the birthday girl. From the very first moment, he noticed sidelong glances directed at Angelica. Suddenly, everyone's attention was drawn to Catherine, who came forward and asked Angelica in bewilderment what she was doing there, whether she really wanted to disgrace Vanessa with her presence again. The girl turned to her and said with displeasure that Catherine should not go so far, but she interrupted her, reminding her of the previous incident when Angelica was going to treat them, and then shamefully ran away. Their escalating quarrel began to attract more and more attention from other guests at the event. Robert, standing to the side, thought that his friend shouldn't have gotten involved with this Catherine and her other classmates, because now she would have a hard time. Meanwhile, Angelique stepped forward and, deciding to fight back, asked Catherine why she had not mentioned such a small detail as the fact that she was the one who invited her to that dinner. Taking the girl by surprise, she added that Catherine and her friends ordered food only for themselves, and then called her and tricked her into going to the restaurant, not wanting to pay for it themselves. And as soon as they saw that her boyfriend had money, she called the rest of her friends to feed them for free. Catherine could not counter the accusations made because that was how it was. Robert was pleased to note that Angelica had finally learned to defend her position. Vanessa, who decided to intervene, touched her shoulder and asked Angela with displeasure to change her tone, because she invited her to her own birthday party and advised her to try to improve relations with the other guests present. Afterwards, the birthday girl asked if she remembered their classmate Sheila and said that her husband was a very important person in the city and their fortune was several hundred yuan. When Angelica heard Vanessa's words that if she bowed down to Sheila, she would no longer have problems with her job, she frowned with displeasure. Then she looked at her friend and asked in bewilderment whether she had called her only to force her to bow her head before someone. Vanessa released her shoulder and sighed deeply. The next moment, she sternly said that people should assess their situation sensibly and not try to jump above their own ceiling. The girl said that Sheila's husband had helped her family by resolving the issue with the textile factory, so she asked Angelica to agree and accept this opportunity, because in this way she would be able to help not only herself, but her too. At that moment, Sheila, whom they had been discussing, entered the room, arm in arm with her husband, Stephen Frey. Delighted by their appearance, Vanessa and Catherine immediately rushed towards them, greeting the important guests. Taking advantage of this moment, Robert approached Angelica and asked if Sheila was her rival. In response, she nodded in agreement and said that this girl had risen a lot lately. Suddenly, their couple attracted the attention of the guests they were discussing. Sheila, together with Steve, approached our heroes and with a smile on her face said that they had not seen each other for quite some time. Afterwards, she introduced them to her husband, who is the young master of the Frey family, which owns the main sewing factory in the city. As praise for their beautiful couple spread throughout the room, the smiles of these two became even wider and more smug. One of the girls even said that she had met Mr. Fry in a past life. Robert couldn't help but chuckle. Without understanding at all what had caused his reaction, 4 pairs of eyes looked at him in bewilderment as he tried to hold back his laughter. Having given up on these attempts, the hero explained that he had never heard such nonsense about past lives. This explanation only elicited disappointed and puzzled expressions from the faces of the 4. Robert's expression suddenly changed. He looked at them angrily and asked why they continued to cling to his girlfriend. Were they really tired of living? These words caused a little surprise in Catherine and Vanessa, and the rest of the room burst into a loud wave of laughter. Turning to Angelica, Vanessa asked with undisguised mockery what was wrong with her boyfriend and whether he even knew about the Frey family. Sheila also couldn't resist taking a jab at the girl and said that she would be unhappy with such an empty head. Angelica wasn't going to let them insult Robert any further, so she stepped forward and sternly told them that her boyfriend was not a subject for their discussion. These words amused Sheila even more, and she asked with feigned excitement in her voice why the guy couldn't help her find a normal job. Without waiting for an answer, she haughtily said that being a parasite was not so good, which is why it was worth choosing your partner more carefully. Here, Stephen entered the conversation and said that the sales department was short of a manager and that if Angelica wanted, he could easily arrange everything. This offer really seemed tempting to her, but she was wary of the expression on the man's face, as well as the fact that he was the husband of her rival Sheila. In an attempt to win her over to his side, Stephen offered 5 Lai as payment. The price he named shocked the girls in the audience, who were once again amazed at how rich he was. Meanwhile, the man added that by accepting this offer, Angelica would be able to provide for not only herself, but also her family, and that a bonus would also be added to the previously mentioned 5 Lai. As he spoke, he extended his hand towards her, slowly approaching. At that moment, Robert put his arm around his girlfriend's shoulder and pulled her slightly to the side, allowing the man to gasp. Then he stepped forward, blocking the girl with his body, and said that he earns hundreds of yuan a month, so in the sentence, they definitely don't need Stephen. Having said this, he grabbed Angelica by the hand and walked towards the exit, ignoring Sheila's disgruntled cries. She demanded that her rival immediately kneel before her and admit that she was a piece of trash who would always work for others, and in case of refusal, she promised to deprive her of her job for the rest of her life. Unable to bear it any longer, Robert paused and, frowning with displeasure, advised her to stop talking this nonsense. Stephen stood up for Sheila, saying that she was his girlfriend and she was free to say whatever she wanted. Then he added dirty that as long as the woman is obedient in bed, he will fulfill all her wishes. Robert sighed wearily and, putting his hand in his inside pocket, admitted that he was very irritated by people like them. So, to show that his girlfriend should not be offended, he would have to teach them a little lesson. Having said this, he dialed the right number. After hearing his request, Justin immediately rushed into the information department office and said that his master needed to immediately check on a girl named Sheila Copes. After giving the staff 10 minutes to find information, he demanded that they find out absolutely everything about her, from the little things to the big scandals, because she dared to go against Robert. Meanwhile, Sheila attacked our hero with a host of new reproaches, trying to hurt him. When he received a call from Justin on his phone, he smiled contentedly and said that he would be very interested to know what skeletons she was hiding in her closet. Immediately after these words, he answered the call, turning on the speakerphone, and the next moment a male voice was heard throughout the hall, reading out all the information found on the girl, starting with her gender, age, and place of residence. When the information was revealed that she had a total of 52 sexual partners, whose ages ranged from 28 to 68, the couple's faces were distorted with bewilderment and anger. There were also 34 instances mentioned of 2 men remaining in the girl's room at once, which came as a shock to Vanessa and Catherine. Still smiling contentedly, Robert asked Sheila if she had too many suitors. She angrily shouted back that this was all slander, for which her lawyer would easily sue him. The hero smiled even wider, asking if that was true, and the next moment the girl's face showed confusion and shock when Justin continued, saying that last year she had contracted a sexually transmitted disease, but recovered in May and then got infected again, and she had also had about 6 abortions in total. He didn't stop there and read out that over the past year she had rented 86 rooms, the last of which was rented yesterday, where from 1 o'clock in the afternoon until 9 o'clock in the evening there were several men. The more information was revealed, the more Stephen's face darkened. And when it was said that one of those visitors was called Bishop Fry, our hero, noticing the familiar surname, mockingly asked Stephen if he knew this man. He hissed through clenched teeth that it was his father, causing the rest of the room to fall into deep shock. Cornered, Sheila lunged at Robert and furiously demanded that he stop this immediately. But he deftly stepped aside, raising the phone above his head and allowing the girl to fall to the floor. When an enraged Stephen approached her, she raised her head and looked at him warily. She fell on her knees and began to beg him to listen to her and to declare that it was all a blatant lie. But he didn't buy her cute face and, giving her a loud slap across the face, asked in bewilderment how she could have led him on all this time, messing around with so many men at the same time. Watching the scene of family squabbles, the satisfied hero ended the call and put the phone back in his pocket. A few minutes later, Sheila, unable to bear her husband's cruelty, collapsed unconscious on the floor. He immediately switched from her to Robert, angrily declaring that in any case their marriage was fictitious, so by breaking it off he would not lose that much. Boiling with rage inside, Stephen, looking at the guy in front of him, tried to understand how he managed to sniff out all this and trample his reputation into the dirt, because he is an ordinary beggar. The next moment, he declared that he would deal with his ex-wife later, but first he would find a new girl for this role. And the first candidate in his mind was Angelica. Stephen decided that it wouldn't be difficult for him to get rid of some poor guy and take his girlfriend for himself. Robert stepped forward and smirked, saying that he was even more pathetic than he seemed, causing the man to grimace in anger. When he said that one call would be enough for him to completely destroy our hero, Robert supported his idea and asked what he had been waiting for all this time. Throwing withering glances at him, the man with the phone in his hand walked away to the window, and the hero was eager to see his reaction when he found out that the 4 rulers of the city were in a fairly close relationship with him. Stephen dialed the required number and requested that all information regarding Robert Nathan be checked for him immediately. When he was told that there were quite a lot of people with that name, the irritated man shouted to look through them all and call him when they found something. However, deep down, there was a doubt that if nothing could be found, it would mean that this guy was better than him. Robert, who had heard the entire conversation, handed him his passport and said that it should make his task easier. Stephen did not refuse such generosity and grabbed the passport, saying that the hero should not regret his decision later. A few minutes later, he finally got a call back, and with an anticipatory grin, he told Robert to prepare himself for the coming disgrace. He shrugged his shoulders indifferently and told Stephen not to beat around the bush and to answer the call. His complete calmness made Angelica very wary and nervous, but she couldn't ask anything yet. Steve followed the advice and pressed the button, answering the call. He wisely turned on the speakerphone and asked what they had managed to dig up on this guy. When the next moment the voice on the other side reported that the higher-ups said that they could not reveal the identity of this person and provide information about him due to insufficient access level, everyone in the room was once again shocked by what they heard. Robert, who openly mocked Steve, admired his ability to dig himself into a hole with his own hands. Deep down, he was grateful to Justin for such prompt work, because no one but him could have completely hidden information about him. When Stephen, realizing his defeat, staggered and clutched his heart, an excited Vanessa ran up to him and asked if everything was okay. She glanced quickly at Sheila, deciding that since the young master of the Frey family was free, she had to take advantage of the opportunity. Vanessa was determined to get the bride's place and had no intention of backing down from hers. Therefore, looking angrily at Angelica, she accused her of the fact that instead of gratitude for the invitation to the birthday party, she put on a whole show here with her boyfriend, ruining the whole celebration, and demanded that they leave immediately. An unhappy Angelica asked her if she would really drive her away and leave the other two. She shouted that she took the insult to the Frey family as an insult to her own family and declared that after today her family was no longer happy with Angelica. Not intending to linger there any longer, the girl grabbed Robert by the hand and, heading towards the exit, threw out as a parting shot that they had not been close friends before, and now even more so. However, before she had even taken a couple of steps, she froze in place in surprise. Anna entered the hall with a small box in her hands, smiling at her. She said that she was glad that she had not made a mistake in the address of the party. Amidst the surprised glances of the crowd and whispers about the possible reason for her presence there, she confidently headed towards the birthday girl. Walking past our heroes, Anna smiled, deciding that she should first give the gift, and only then say who it was from. She hoped that this would increase Angelica's reputation. Meanwhile, Robert quietly told his friend to smile and not show that they had problems. He then added that although he understood that she had no intention of setting others up because of her kindness, he, unlike her, was not as kind. When Anna approached Vanessa, she was clearly inspired. Even Stephen stopped playing the deeply wounded man and approached them. Handing her the case, she handed the hostess of the evening the box and said that on behalf of the anonymous guest, she would like to present her with this gift. With words of congratulations, Anna opened the case, revealing a golden phoenix token. The girl, surprised by such an expensive gift, could not help but inquire about the identity of the anonymous person. She was sure that it was definitely not Stephen, because he simply could not afford such a thing. Vanessa reached out to take her gift, thinking that she needed to find out the identity of the sender by any means necessary, and, if it was a man, to strengthen her connection with him. However, at the last moment, Robert's loud voice was heard calling out to Anna. He told her to take the phoenix back. The hero believed that this girl was not worthy of such a gift. Standing next to Vanessa, Catherine was indignant and asked in bewilderment how such a poor man, how he even dared to interfere at such a moment. Vanessa, no less dissatisfied with what had happened, joined in, and looking at Angelica, asked how many more times that evening she was going to interfere and make all sorts of stupid scenes at her birthday party, especially in front of such an important person. Afterwards, she shouted at our heroes to get out of here immediately. Vanessa was full of confidence that since Anna Davis herself had come here, she would soon be able to achieve great heights in the fashion world. The thought that even the Frey family would worship her delighted her. The other guests supported the hostess of the evening and in one voice shouted for our heroes to leave this place. Confused, Anna approached Robert and asked him in confusion what was going on and if she had said something wrong. Her question to him left everyone shocked and confused. Vanessa, worried, approached Anna and carefully asked why she had decided to talk to him. The thought that Robert knew such an important person shocked the girl, because these two were at rock bottom, which she told Anna about. She cast a displeased glance at the birthday girl and said that it was Angelica who asked her to give her this phoenix. These words caused Vanessa even more surprise and misunderstanding. Smiling nervously, she asked if it was a joke. Robert turned towards the exit, telling Anna that she had no need to talk to them, since they had already been kicked out of here. Nodding in agreement, the girl turned away and happily grabbed Angelica by the arm. This gesture once again showed Vanessa that the two really knew each other and were on good terms. Trying to rectify the situation, she ran towards the exit, calling out to Angelica and asking her not to leave. However, two guards blocked her path, not allowing her to leave the hall. Trying to break through them, the girl continued to shout Angelica's name, saying that she was wrong and asking to forgive her because they were friends. With a sad expression on her face and tears in her eyes, the girl turned to Vanessa and asked if they could really be called friends after everything that had happened. Robert touched her shoulder in a comforting gesture. Afterwards, without even looking in Vanessa's direction, he said that he was giving her 2 hours to leave this city. He also warned that if she caught his eye again, he shouldn't be blamed for the consequences. Hearing this, the girl collapsed exhausted on the floor, realizing with horror that these 2 hours were too little time to decide what to do with her property and leave the city. As soon as they left the room, hidden from prying eyes, Robert cheerfully patted Angelica on the back and said that everything was finally over so she could relax. Watching the girl attack him with her fists, Anna thought that although the problems Angelica got into were not that serious, she would not get into any more troubles in the future. Remembering her, Robert winked at her and said that he had already sorted out the feng shui and that he had arranged to meet Justin a little later. He was going to come up with something for Angelica, worried that she might have questions about the balance of his cards, so he had already discussed it with Anna earlier, deciding to create a legend about becoming a feng shui master. Anna played along with him and replied that she would send the fee a little later. Having said goodbye to her, our heroes went out into the street. On the way to the car, Angelica, struggling with her embarrassment, quietly thanked Robert for his help today. He pretended not to hear, put his hand to his ear and said in a satisfied voice that the wind was too strong and he did not hear anything and asked her to repeat it again. The girl immediately flared up with irritation and, pulling the guy by the ear, shouted at him to stop pretending, then asked why Anna behaved so kindly with him. Dodging her questions, the hero skillfully changed the subject, reminding his friend that she had previously wanted to open a healthy food restaurant and said that it just so happened that he had some money set aside that he could spend on helping her. Angelica pushed him away with displeasure, saying that this was money obtained by deception, so she would not use it because she did not want to feel guilty later. Her words only made Robert laugh. Pulling the girl towards him, he said that she should not refuse the richest man in the world and miss such an opportunity. So the next morning, the two of them went to the real estate agency. The hero followed his inspired friend, yawning sleepily. When they approached the entrance to the building they needed, Angelica said that since Robert was such a big investor, he could buy the best and most suitable premises. Inside, they were met by a man who was one of the real estate managers and offered his help to the heroes. Robert explained to him that he was planning to rent a space, and after listening to him, the man nodded and promised to find a suitable consultant for him. Afterwards, he called out to Chloe, who was standing nearby, and asked her to advise these guests, to which she discontentedly reminded him that she only served VIP clients. Robert winced in disgust at her arrogance. The customers standing behind were discussing the fact that Chloe mostly only saw girls and, with rare exceptions, high-ranking men, since she was the main salesperson. When the manager gave her a dirty look, about to scold her, Robert beat him to it, thoughtfully asking why it mattered what the client was like and why she just couldn't do her job properly. While the two of them were discussing something, Chloe cast a disdainful glance at the hero, deciding that he, like most men, just wanted to get her attention. Suddenly, the cold metal of a soda can touched Robert's cheek. When he looked at the smiling Angelica, she asked which flavor he would prefer. When they saw her, the visitors started to cast mocking glances at Chloe, saying that the girl next to this guy was clearly from the upper class and had a good figure. After finishing the conversation with Robert, the manager decided to leave Chloe alone and called Erica over. Sometime later, our heroes moved to another place, where Erica told about how, according to Robert's request, she had selected an area of 538 square meters, and also mentioned that this object included 2 floors. Having finished her explanations, she offered to draw up a contract for the sale or lease of this place if Robert liked it. When Angelique thoughtfully said that it would be too expensive, Robert interrupted her and said that the place was perfect for them and money was not a problem. Nodding, Erica turned to the owner of the premises, Christopher, and asked what he thought about it. He replied that he had originally planned to use the premises for his own purposes, but now the plans had changed. So if they wanted to rent the place, then the set price was the most suitable. They couldn't find anything like it anywhere else. The consultant noticed the doubt that flashed across the guy's face and whispered that he was in a difficult situation. Christopher's 2 children were seriously ill, so he was spending all his money on their treatment. One drug cost more than 10 yuan, and he needed 4 of them, and he also had to pay for the hospital expenses. After listening to her, Robert felt sorry for the man. He was about to say that he agreed to rent, but he was stopped. Chloe entered in the company of a fair-haired man, arrogantly said that they also came to look at this place, then described the situation, that her client Peter had just returned from the UK and wanted to rent a larger space. Christopher looked at the couple with displeasure and replied that he needed to discuss everything with the first clients first, and then with them. When Chloe started to object, Peter interrupted her, telling her to be quiet, and walked forward. Stopping in front of Angelica, he extended his hand to her and with a smile on his face, said that he would be very pleased to meet her, adding that although he had lived in Great Britain for more than 10 years, he had never met such beauties. The girl looked uncertainly at the man's outstretched palm. When she waved at him with a sweet smile instead of putting her hand in his for a kiss, Peter was stunned with shock and said it was okay. Angelique approached Robert and, with confusion, quietly asked why Peter had answered. Nothing to worry about to her greeting. He sighed heavily, and tapping his finger on his temple, advised her to think a little with her brain. At this point, Chloe intervened, explaining with a hint of reproach in her voice that Peter had wanted to give Angelica a light kiss, and if she had been more educated, she would have understood this. Robert, who stood up for his friend, retorted, saying that these were purely cultural differences and added that well-mannered people usually do not kiss already taken ladies. In response to his statement that this was an open display of rudeness and ignorance, Chloe's face showed indignation and irritation. She wanted to be indignant about this, but Peter interrupted her, saying that it was nonsense. Afterwards, he looked around and said that he liked this place too. Other places were not so interesting to him. When Angelica said that they had also chosen this place, Peter smiled and said that in that case he was ready to give in to her, because he did not want to compete with such a wonderful girl. Our heroes were surprised by his words, because Christian had already spoken about the queue earlier. Meanwhile, Peter continued asking them if they had discussed the rent yet. When he said that he could buy the entire building and rent it out to our heroes, they looked at him as if he were crazy. Christopher, on the other hand, was pleased to hear that someone was going to buy the entire building and asked Peter if he could really do it. Chloe explained that her client's father owned several design companies in the UK and China, and his income exceeded hundreds of yuan. Peter nodded in agreement, confirming her words, and said that he had enough money, so there was nothing to worry about. Christopher walked up to Robert with a guilty expression on his face and said that he had no choice but to give the building to Peter due to his position. The hero chuckled and said that he hadn't said that he was just going to rent the building. The surprised man looked at him and asked if this meant that he also wanted to buy the building. Robert admitted that he had planned to buy it from the very beginning. But before he could voice it, he was interrupted. His girlfriend standing next to him squeezed his hand tighter and asked him, in confusion, what he was even thinking about. After listening to him, Christopher said that in that case, according to the rules, he would give the house to his first clients, at which point Chloe intervened again, offering to hold an auction and give the house to the one who offers more. Robert, fully confident of his victory, agreed to this proposal without any complaints. Peter smiled, and also accepting the offer, asked Christian how much he wanted to get for the premises. The excited man said that he had sold the house in a hurry, so he was willing to settle for 15 yuan, but otherwise he would have sold it for 17. The price he heard completely satisfied Peter, so he decided to raise the price to turn the situation to his advantage, because for such a place in this convenient area, he was willing to pay at least 18 yuan. Thinking like this, he smiled contentedly and said that it was a reasonable price. And the next moment, he offered 15.5 yuan, saying that he was willing to make a down payment of 50% and the mortgage would cover the rest. The idea that if he bought the building and then signed a lease with Angelica and became closer to her, the man was undoubtedly tempted. Having made his bet, he turned to Robert, saying that it was now his turn. The hero made a thoughtful expression on his face and barely had time to say anything when Angelica grabbed him by the shoulders. After apologizing to everyone, she said that she needed to discuss something with him and asked to give them a couple of minutes, and headed towards the exit with Robert. As soon as they were outside, she immediately began to scold him for such a thoughtless and risky act as bargaining. She was categorically against him spending so much money for her restaurant. Robert pinched her cheek and explained that she had misunderstood everything, and that in fact, she would simply be renting a room from him. Afterwards, he asked in surprise how she still couldn't understand the foreigner's idea. Catching her questioning look, The hero sighed and, putting his arm around her shoulders, told her that she shouldn't worry because he wasn't as reckless as she imagined. He just wanted to pay a high price to wipe the noses of these show-offs. In this way, he convinced his girlfriend that there was no reason to worry. A few moments later, they returned, and Robert, apologizing for the wait, announced that they had decided to continue trading. His words caused strong displeasure in Peter, who had already managed to think that his opponent had decided to jump off. Stepping forward, he impatiently asked how much our heroes were willing to pay for the house. Robert smiled and, without letting go of his girlfriend, confidently declared that he would give her 100 yuan. The amount he named shocked Christina. Peter couldn't help but let out a short laugh. He chuckled and asked Robert to avoid such jokes and said that he did not have to portray himself as a hero. At these words, he thought for a moment, recalling a local proverb. Afterwards, adjusting his glasses, he said that if he was not mistaken, then this would be the appropriate word, throwing dust in the eyes. Chloe smiled venomously, and turning to Robert, asked him not to disgrace himself in their country, because the amount he named even sounded absurd. The hero expected such a reaction, so he took out a previously prepared wallet and advised them not to rush to conclusions. He then took out a 100 yuan bill, asking Chloe who was creating their country's image anyway. The day before, when he was cleaning his house, a couple of 100 yuan accidentally fell out of the boxes, which he decided to now use to put this foreigner in his place. Holding out a bill, he asked if it was enough to make the purchase. Christian and the female consultants saw such a fabulous sum for the first time in person, so everyone froze in place in shock. Chloe was puzzled as to where Robert could have gotten so much money. When Angelica looked out from behind the guy and asked why everyone was silent, the hero quickly hid the bill, deciding that it was better for her not to see it, and asked her to be patient. After this, he turned to Peter, offering to continue their bargaining. The man was at a loss because of what he saw, because he understood perfectly well that he did not have enough money to be able to compete with Robert, and continuing to bargain would only bury himself deeper. Accepting his defeat, Peter clapped his hands, saying that he now saw that his opponent was not poor either. Trying to hide his condition behind a nervous smile, he tried to prick the guy, saying that if he continued to spend money so thoughtlessly, he would quickly lose all his parents' savings. So out of concern for these people, he would not raise the price. Then he switched to Christina, asking his opinion. Frankly, Robert was deeply disappointed that the foreigner had given up so quickly, as he had been hoping for a more interesting battle. He sighed and said that 100 yuan was not such a big amount, so there was nothing to say. Then he pointed to a surprised Peter, saying that he was in no position to talk about his family budget. Taking out his wallet again, he took out a 100 yuan bill and said, "Pay the entire amount right now." Robert stood in front of Christian and, putting the bill into his palm, explained that he was giving it not only for the purchase of the premises, but for the treatment of his sick children. The man looked down at his palm in surprise and disbelief. Meanwhile, Robert turned his gaze to Erica and asked if this money would be enough for the drugs, to which the surprised girl nodded meekly. Smiling, he told Christian that this was only a small part of what he could do to help him in this situation, so he asked him to accept his help. Touched by his generosity, the man fell to his knees. The hero began to thank him tearfully, not expecting such a reaction, became a little confused and asked Christian to rise from his knees. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of him, informing him that he would only be awarded 100 points, due to the fact that he had deliberately aimed to gain points through large spending. Peter, standing to the side, cleared his throat and said that the landlord should thank him too. Stepping forward, he explained his demand, saying that if it weren't for him, Robert wouldn't have raised the price to 100 yen, so there was also someone else's credit for his good deed. The hero grimaced in displeasure and asked how he could have sunk so low. Approaching the foreigner, he said that he should not try to portray himself as a hero in this situation, because Peter had absolutely nothing to do with his spending, and added that the man himself would hardly have done something similar if he had set a lower price. Peter couldn't respond to this statement because Robert was right. His family couldn't afford to just spend 100 yuan. Realizing that this opponent was too tough for him, the man decided that he should not mess with this guy in the future to avoid unnecessary problems. With these thoughts, he ran out of the building, followed by Chloe, trying to stop her client. As soon as the two left, Robert turned to Erica and asked her to complete all the necessary paperwork. A couple of hours later, our heroes finally settled all the formalities and were walking around the city, and inspired Angelica asked how much the rent would cost her. In response to her question, the hero asked how much he could pay. She angrily demanded that he name the price so that she could start saving already. Robert laughed and said that she could not worry about it because he did not suffer any significant losses since he used his own money received for feng shui lessons. Naturally, Angelica didn't believe him and using her fists shouted at him to stop lying to her. The hero easily dodged her blows and was about to tell another lie to calm his friend down. However, at that moment something else caught his attention, namely, a red-haired woman in a blue sleeveless dress. Robert was very surprised because her image from behind seemed painfully familiar to him. Distracted by her, he stopped dodging Angelica's blows, causing her to hit her face against his chest. She pulled away from him and, rubbing her bruised nose, asked Robert what was wrong with him and why he had stopped so abruptly. He apologized, said that he had urgent business to attend to, and rushed at full speed after the stranger, who disappeared into the alley. He was sure that he was not mistaken about her identity, but this only raised more questions, because the one he knew had long been dead. A few moments later, he managed to notice her figure ahead. The hero called out to the woman, asking her to stop. When the word "mom" left his lips, the woman smiled slightly without turning her head. And the next moment, having accelerated significantly, she ran on. Robert was amazed at her speed. No matter how hard he tried to catch up with her, putting in all his efforts, he couldn't do it, even with 1,500 points invested in characteristics. Sometime later, the woman stopped, having encountered an obstacle in the form of a wall. Robert finally caught up with her and demanded that she turn around and show her face. But she wasn't going to give up so easily, so with a couple of quick jumps, she overcame the obstacle and jumped onto the roof, quickly disappearing. The hero clenched his fists in great irritation. Looking around, he noticed a camera hanging above him. Robert was obsessed with the idea of revealing the identity of this woman to confirm his suspicions. So he soon broke into the security department of a nearby house and laid several yuan on the table. He then demanded that the man provide him with all the recordings from their surveillance cameras and make copies. Once everything was ready, Robert headed towards the exit. The man who gave him the copies contacted his superiors almost immediately after the guy left and reported that a man who had previously attracted their attention had come here. Sometime later, the Claude family members gathered again in the office, where they watched the received video recording, made right near their hotel. Victoria said that her subordinates contacted her and reported that Robert had purchased this recording from the camera. Claude, sitting in his chair, crossed his palms thoughtfully, considering this information, and asked his daughter if she knew this woman. Victoria stood up and, putting a small envelope with information on his desk, told him that she had previously been interested in a secret organization. Although we managed to collect only a little, it was enough to confidently assume that this woman is one of the defenders. When Claude asked her to elaborate on this, she said that this was very ancient information that acted as bodyguards, but the identity of this particular woman could not be established. The man listened to his daughter's words, while simultaneously studying the information provided to him. In addition to everything mentioned above, the girl did not forget to tell that there was also suspiciously little information on Robert, so she assumed that these two could be somehow connected, and if this is really the case, then dealing with him will not be so easy. Sam, who had been standing quietly to the side until this point, perked up and excitedly said that all they needed to do was involve a few more people and their connections to eliminate this problem. Victoria agreed with his proposed strategy, but warned that he had to act very carefully so as not to get into trouble. The ideal option would be to turn someone influential against Robert. Claude put the papers aside and reached for a cigar. Lighting it, he thoughtfully said that if it was true that Robert was one of the defenders, then this would become very valuable information for other corporations. Then the price on this guy's head would increase greatly and a real hunt would be open for him. Meanwhile, our hero, without wasting any extra time, left the city, warning Angelica by phone that he needed to return to his hometown for a short while, and that she could take care of business in the meantime. As soon as he finished the conversation, he sighed wearily, guiltily saying that she was now beside herself with anger and discontent because of his spontaneous decision. Louise, who was driving, asked cautiously where they were headed now. Robert replied, looking out the window at the picturesque expanses, that they were going to his house. For a few minutes he indulged in nostalgia, because he had not been here for quite some time. Although he had heard that this town had begun to actively develop recently, he had not paid much attention to it, because he had come this time only for his mother's sake and had no intention of staying here. Suddenly, Louise stopped, surprised to see a small group of residents standing near the barrier ahead. An old woman who came to Robert's window said that if they wanted to pass, they had to pay 5 lei, which was nothing for the hero. So he gave her the money without saying anything. Immediately after that, With a greedy smile on her face, she allowed them to drive on. When Louise expressed her concerns about the legality of what had happened, he advised her to ignore it because those people had simply mistaken them for tourists and were trying to rip them off. They didn't manage to get far before they were forced to stop again. Their way was blocked by another group of people armed with farm tools. Louise looked at the guy sitting next to her and asked what they should do. He chuckled and said that it was starting to get on his nerves. Afterwards, he told the girl to turn off the engine while he went out and chatted with the villagers. The woman, clasping her hands behind her back, walked around the car and approached Robert's window, saying that they wouldn't be able to get through that easily. After smiling haughtily, she explained that the road was a toll road and that she had to pay 8 Lai. Louise was indignant and said that they had just paid, and the hero, frowning, asked when he had managed to say that he was going on a trip. These words caused great discontent in the woman. She pressed herself closely to the glass and shouted that she did not care, and that if they did not pay, they could turn around and go back. With an exasperated sigh, Robert abruptly opened the door, not caring at all that the woman had almost pinched his hand, and asked forcefully if she really thought he wouldn't be able to go any further. In response, the woman pointed to a pool of blood nearby and said that he was not the first to refuse to cooperate, and if the hero wanted to risk going it alone against 10, he could try. At that moment, a plump man approached them with a beam in his hands and cheerfully said that they had been messing around for too long. Immediately after these words, he raised the beam above his head to strike, saying that all violators must be eliminated. The man had barely taken a step towards him when Robert grabbed his face with his hand and said with contempt that money had completely blinded them. The man tried to pull his hand away from himself, but it was all in vain because his opponent was too strong. Robert frowned and said he had no intention of going soft on the likes of them, and brought his foot down hard on the man's leg. He screamed in pain and bent over, clasping his hands around the injured limb. 2 men standing to the side with hammers rushed at the boy to avenge their comrade. But Robert dealt with them quite easily. Having lost consciousness from the blows they received, they collapsed to the ground. By this time, everyone else had come running to the noise. The man leading the squad pointed to the guy standing in front and ordered the others to take the car and throw the guy into the ravine. Hearing this, Robert became even more angry and, turning halfway towards them, asked if this was humane. Louise, frightened by what was happening, decided that they couldn't handle it themselves and quickly dialed the number of her boss, Justin. A few moments later, Robert climbed back into the car and said that they could go. But the girl, before touching the steering wheel, asked the hero if he was okay. He replied that these people were not his rivals. They were separated by only a couple of fractures. Margaret couldn't give up so easily, so she blocked their way again and shouted reproachfully that not only had he not paid for the road, but he had also beaten up ordinary residents, so she wouldn't let him pass, only over her dead body. Robert clicked his tongue in displeasure and told Louise to go ahead boldly, and he would take all the consequences upon himself. She had no choice but to listen to him. Noticing the approach of the car, Margaret instantly jumped to the side. But at the last moment, the wheel painfully crushed her leg. The woman screamed loudly in terrible pain, so she fell to the ground, curled up on the ground. A few hundred meters later, our hero's path was blocked again. The old man standing in front shouted to the others to immediately surround the car and not let this guy get away. Quite tired of these annoying residents, Robert got out of the car again and asked what they wanted. The men shouted in unison that they had to pay for the wonderful views around them and demanded that he give them 1 mao, otherwise they threatened to call the police. Hearing the price, Robert couldn't help but chuckle, thinking that if he were in the old world, he wouldn't have given these people a penny. Afterwards, he looked at the crowd in front of him and said that he would rather give money to the needs of society than to any of them. When he promised to maim everyone present there and then sue for extortion, the men's discontent and irritation only increased. Noticing their warlike attitude, the hero beckoned with his finger, saying that if they were so confident in themselves, they could try to attack. The entire crowd simultaneously howled with anger and indignation towards him. Before the old man could take a single step towards Robert, a wooden stick suddenly flew from the side and hit him in the head, knocking him off his feet. A fair-haired man, leading a crowd of club-wielding subordinates, asked in bewilderment what they were doing. Throwing a threatening glance at the silent crowd of villagers, Michael said that they would not get away with such tyranny so easily. When he extended his hand to his subordinate, the latter silently handed him the club. At that very moment, one of the villagers approached them, wanting to explain the situation. But Michael was ruthless, sparing no effort. He hit the man on the head with a bat, asking who allowed him to open his mouth. As soon as he fell to the ground unconscious, he snorted in displeasure and walked over to Robert. Bowing, he apologized for what happened and said that Company O had come to help him. From the name of the company and the man's name, he realized that the head of the famous O family was in front of him. It was not difficult to guess that it was Louise who was able to somehow warn him. Now it became clear to the hero why Justin sent her to work with him. Nodding to Michael, Robert walked up to the car door and asked him to check how many toll stops there were in the area and then confiscate all the stolen money. The man bowed to the hero again and replied that he would see to everything. Immediately after this, the car moved off. Louise said with relief that they were very lucky that help arrived in time. Robert agreed with her and thanked her for being so resourceful. Half an hour later, they drove out to a lonely house, and upon seeing it, Louise asked Robert if it was the right house. He sadly replied that yes. The girl's attentive eyes did not hide the change in his mood, and she worriedly asked if everything was okay. The guy waved her off, saying that everything was okay and that he had simply remembered one problem. In this way, they drove a little closer, stopping right at the gate. Taking the gifts he had prepared in advance, he and Louise got out of the car. Robert, who was walking ahead, joyfully called out to his brother. He knew that Dave had always been against the development of his business, and in his last conversation even broke off their relationship. But the hero hoped that his brother would not kick him out right away, because they were relatives after all. When Robert stopped in front of his brother and handed him the boxes, saying that they were gifts for him and his sister-in-law, Dave jumped in surprise and gratefully accepted the boxes. However, the very next moment his calm expression distorted with irritation, and driving his brother away, he shouted in displeasure that he himself was capable of providing his family with things, and Robert should instead pay attention to his girlfriend and give her gifts. Louise, standing nearby, politely apologized and told Dave that he was mistaken. She was not his brother's girlfriend. He did not comment on this in any way, instead turning towards the house and loudly calling his wife, saying that his prodigal brother had returned home. Watching him, Robert sighed with relief, as he was sure that Dave was no longer angry with him. A few moments later, the front door opened and a joyful Emma looked out and asked if he was really back. She quickly pushed aside her husband standing in front of her and approached Robert. When she noticed Louise standing next to her, she asked with a hint of displeasure why he hadn't warned her earlier, since she was completely unprepared to arrange a viewing. Louise blushed deeply and looked down at the floor, saying that they had got it all wrong. But Emma ignored her words and, pushing Robert aside, invited the girl inside. The hero decided to take advantage of this moment and get his brother to talk. Sighing, Dave spoke first and dryly, what happened to him again, since he even decided to go back. After a short silence, Robert told about what he saw their mother. These words greatly surprised his brother, who, turning a puzzled look at him, asked what this meant. Having told him in detail what had happened, the hero added that he even had video from the cameras, but he was still unable to find out the current identity of this woman. As soon as he finished his story, he turned his suspicious gaze to his brother, who had been silent all this time, and asked if he had told him everything about the death of their parents. Dave sighed heavily and headed towards the house, asking Robert to wait for him here for a bit. From the gloomy expression on his face, our hero realized that his brother was not telling him something. A couple of minutes later, Dave came back out to him. Stopping next to Robert, he handed him the ring. While the hero was looking at the ordinary-looking ring with confusion, Dave said that he accidentally found it in his mother's jewelry box. At that moment, Robert's attention was drawn to the sword engraved on one side of the ring. Dave said seriously that it was really time for him to tell everything, and he began with the information that the cremation of their parents was carried out by a strange man who called himself their close friend. Of his appearance, he clearly remembered the conspicuous scar on his eyebrow. After listening to him, Robert admitted that he had not shared everything either, and told about how he had seen with his own eyes how that woman jumped to a height of 3 or 4 meters. Although only ghosts or martial arts masters are capable of such a thing. Seeing his brother's stunned face, the hero smiled and said that Dave didn't have to worry about it because he would figure it out himself. Dave frowned and asked how he was going to track her down without any money or connections. So, immediately sparing his brother any trouble, he advised him to spend that time looking for a job. Robert put his arm around his shoulder and said that he understood the reason for his concern, and convinced him that there was absolutely nothing to worry about now, because he had earned a lot of money and would soon transfer him some amount, which should be enough for the first time. To this, Dave responded in a displeased tone that he was simply worried that our hero would not take advantage of him, and warned that if he ended up on the street again, he should not even think about coming here. When Robert said that he would transfer him 500 yuan for the first time, Dave did not believe him and said that he was not able to give even 5 fen. However, a few moments later he received a notification about the transfer of 500 yuan, which shocked him. The next day, the hero helped his brother buy a brand new car. Taking their purchases with them, they headed towards home. Louise and Emma came out to Dave's voice and advised Robert to take a little rest, since he rarely came to see them and was already up to his ears in work. Taking the purchases from his hands, she and her husband carried them into the house. The hero noticed his daughter-in-law's strange state, so he looked at Louise with concern and asked what happened to Emma. The girl replied that her relatives had called her and said that the future of the family would depend only on her. As soon as she told about this, a loudly laughing woman approached the gate with her son. Robert turned at the sound of her voice. Madeline greeted him briefly and said that she was now going to Emma and advised our hero to also come into the house because she had something to talk about with his brother. As he passed Louise, Duke lingered his gaze on her body a little longer than he should have. Stepping behind Robert, she asked him with displeasure who these two were, and he replied that they were Emma's relatives, who, to his regret, were overly intrusive. Madeline walked into the living room and sat down with her son on the couch opposite her sister and Dave. Completely uninterested in the conversation, Duke immediately immersed himself in the mobile game. Madeline started the conversation by telling them that she was currently having problems in her family and asked if they could help her out a little. At that moment, Robert came in and said reproachfully that he had thought that she had come simply to see her family. Madeline, embarrassed, replied that they had indeed come to visit them and also to ask for help. When she said that Robert could help her too, he raised an eyebrow questioningly and asked how he could be of help to them. Madeline pointed to her son, who was engrossed in the game, and told her that one of her friends had recently introduced her daughter to Duke and they got along well, but they had no car, no apartment, no job, so it was hard to talk about any kind of future. Robert smiled and agreed that it was indeed unpleasant. Developing her thought, Madeline rose from the sofa and said that since they all lived well, and the hero even had his own company, then they must have a lot of money, which she asked them to share with her. She assured that she and her son did not need that much. Just 2 mao would be more than enough. Hearing this, Emma jumped up from her seat and asked in bewilderment what she was even talking about. She remembered very well that Madeline had still not returned the money she had borrowed earlier. Moreover, everyone knew that Duke was fond of gambling, so she could not give in to her again by giving her money. Madeline's face showed displeasure, and she reminded Emma that they were still part of the same family, and so she saw nothing wrong with borrowing a little money from a family member. At this point, Robert intervened in the conversation, saying that Aunt Madeline was right. 2 mao could be given for a wedding, but at least 1 mao was still needed for the banquet. Plus, other expenses had to be added to all of this, which would cost another 2 mao. Having calculated the final amount, he agreed to lend her 4.5 mao without interest, but on the condition that Madeline would return it within 5 years. Duke immediately looked up from his phone and jumped up on the couch, asking if he was really going to do it. Seizing on the opportunity that was shining on the horizon, Madeline asked why Robert was counting every penny, since it seemed like he had a lot of money after starting his business. The hero sat down on a chair and, smiling, replied that even he couldn't count all the money, but she didn't need to worry about it. He knew perfectly well what kind of game this woman was playing, so he decided to play along with her a little, checking how far she was willing to go. She continued to develop the topic she had started, asking why she should return the money if he had so much of it. Without waiting for his answer, she suggested that instead of returning the money, he could arrange for her son to work as a financial director in his company. Fired up by this idea, Duke nodded his head in agreement, saying that he could handle it. Robert smiled and mockingly said that Duke couldn't even count to 100, so how could he work in finance? He retorted that it was easy to learn, and he was sure that the hero was so rich that he wouldn't notice the loss of a couple of yuan if he became a financial director. Getting up from his seat, he began to approach Robert, saying that he would very much like to study in the company of his relatives and would not be at all against his sister standing next to him training him. The Duke decided that Louise was Robert's secretary, so deciding that all the hero's wealth should go to him, he wanted to take this girl too. When the boy pointed his hands towards Louise, the hero grabbed his wrist, squeezing it tightly. Afterwards, he sternly said that his last name was Nathan, and Duke's last name was Chester, so they couldn't be related. Tossing him aside, Robert explained that his company's turnover was tens of thousands of yuan a month and asked if Duke had ever heard of such figures before. Madeline immediately rushed to her son and, standing up for him, said that he was not that bad, so the hero could very well arrange for him to live with him. Also on the verge of irritation and anger, she asked why, in the end, being such a rich man, he couldn't give them these measly 4.5 mao for free. Robert grinned maliciously and replied that now he would not give them anything at all, because they did not deserve it. Duke, who had risen to his feet, began to attack him, showering him with various insults. Robert began to flex his fists and was no longer going to tolerate this circus, and demanded that they leave this house and not even think about coming here again unless they wanted to leave with broken bones. Furious, Madeline muttered through her teeth that he had made his choice. Running out of the house, she shouted at the end that now he would sing in a completely different way. Having said this, she fell to her knees and screamed for help as loudly as she could, saying that there was a real monster here who was not giving money to his poor relatives. Nearby neighbors heard her loud scream. When people started running to their house, Robert said with displeasure that Madeline should stop this one-man show. Soon there was a whole crowd of worried neighbors near their house. Suddenly, a white car parked not far from them. The man who came out from there was unmistakably recognized as the head of the Forrest family. Gilbert quickly found Robert with his eyes, and approaching him, joyfully shook his hand, saying that he was very glad that such a large businessman did not forget about his native land. Madeline rose from her knees and asked in bewilderment how this guy looked like an entrepreneur, since he didn't even lend money to the family, despite the fact that her family had taken him into their home. The angry woman then turned on Gilbert, saying that he should stand up for the interests of his citizens as befits a leader. Emma objected to her, saying that they always gave her money at the first request, but she had not returned a penny to them, especially since Robert had recently said that he would lend her 4.5 mao. Madeline couldn't let her sister tell the whole truth, so she rushed at her with an enraged roar. But before she could reach Emma, Robert stepped forward and with one movement knocked the woman into the ground. Afterwards, he mockingly asked where she was rushing to. Was she really afraid that the whole truth would come out? Duke did not stand aside. Picking up a heavy stone from the ground, he ran towards our hero, asking in bewilderment how he dared to touch his mother. Without much effort, Robert knocked the guy down with just one quick punch. With a reddened cheek, Duke collapsed to the ground next to his mother. Having eliminated all interruptions, Robert told his daughter-in-law that she could now continue calmly and no one would dare interrupt her again. She continued from the place where the hero agreed to give money, but this was not enough for Madeline, and she wanted to get her son a job as financial director in his company. When she also mentioned that after her father's death, Madeline had deprived her family of more than 10 acres of land, and as soon as she married Dale, she began to demand a second dowry. The woman gritted her teeth in displeasure at the fact that Emma had decided to lay out absolutely everything. Emma's words became harsher and harsher with each passing minute. Dale held her back when she wanted to attack her sister with her fists, telling her that she shouldn't get so excited. Robert apologized to Zach for having to witness this scene and said that since he was there, they had something to discuss. After receiving the man's nod of agreement, the hero took out 100 yuan from his wallet, saying that Lotus County was his home, where he was born and raised. But, unfortunately, many places needed repairs, for which there was not always the funds. Therefore, on behalf of him and his brother, he would like to allocate 100 yuan for repairs. Surprised, Robert accepted the money, even though he had already heard rumors that someone had sorted out the closed roads. But he couldn't imagine that it would be this guy, who also helped them financially. He addressed the residents gathered around and loudly declared that all this money would be spent in the right direction, and all accounts would be open and transparent. The crowd reacted enthusiastically to this news and thanked Robert for it. Madeline moved a little closer to her son, who was holding his face, and asked worriedly if he was okay. The Duke did not hear this question, because he was completely absorbed in thoughts about how he would get both Robert's money and his woman at any cost. Within an hour, the crowd had dispersed to their homes, and our heroes had returned to theirs. Some time later, Louise looked in on Robert and said that Emma had already prepared dinner and had asked him to call him. Suddenly, at that moment, someone's loud cry was heard from the entrance, calling our hero. Duke did not waste any time, and having contacted the right people, returned again. A few moments later, Leroy kicked the door down. When he saw Robert, Duke pointed at him and shouted that it was he who not only did not give him money, but also beat him up. The hero frowned with displeasure at the sight of these uninvited guests. Emma quickly came out to the noise, with Dave armed with a bat, who asked in a threatening voice who was going to hurt his brother. As soon as Emma noticed Duke's light-colored head, she stopped in front of him and asked menacingly how he had even had the courage to come back. Leroy turned an uncertain look to the irritated Duke and reminded him that they had only agreed on Robert, and there was no decision about the rest. Only now did the man realize that this boy had problems with his head, because if they did what he asked, there would be no end to the problems later. Duke clicked his tongue in displeasure, said that he would do everything himself, and snatched the bat from Leroy's hands. Then he rushed at the hero with his weapon raised above his head, shouting loudly that they just needed to kill everyone and bury them quietly. Then no one would know about anything. He had hardly approached Robert when the latter seized him by the arm and said that Duke had forgotten one important thing, namely, his promise to break all his bones if he or his mother ever came here again. Confirming his words with actions, he kicked the guy in the groin with all his might. Listening to his heart-rending scream, Leroy and his men involuntarily squeezed their legs tighter, imagining how painful it would be. Gradually, the scream of Duke, who fell to the floor, turned into a quiet whine. Leroy's boys turned around when they heard someone's angry voice behind them. Michael angrily asked who they were that they dared to target his master and, pointing at them, gave his men the order to deal with them. A couple of minutes later, all the uninvited guests had received a couple of strong blows and were now forced to sit on the ground, with their hands behind their heads, not daring to even move an extra time. When Robert, in response to Michael's question about which of them had caused him trouble, replied that they had all done a good job, the man ran his finger along his neck and suggested that he simply get rid of them all or beat them up so badly that it would take them several years to recover. The hero replied that they were too pathetic and therefore not worth such efforts. Besides, Emma was still his relative and she would not want such a fate for her nephew. The Duke immediately picked up on his words and began to beg for mercy, suggesting that they simply quietly and peacefully disperse and forget what had happened. Thinking about the future of the boy, Robert approached him and noted that he had a fairly strong physique. Only laziness was a hindrance, and said that it would be good to get him a job. Michael was very disappointed with the verdict, but Robert, like no one else, knew that this test would be difficult for Duke. So he asked Michael to arrange for him to work somewhere on a construction site, where he would only do the dirtiest and most tedious work, and also asked to assign 2 people to the boy who would beat him every time he showed laziness. When Duke heard that the guards could do the same thing every time he smoked, gambled, or used the phone, and after the construction was completed, send him to a new construction site, it began to seem to him that if he accepted death, it would be much better. Dale, Emma, and Louise smiled happily, pleased with the punishment given to Duke. When he finished, Robert stood up and said that it was time for him to go and that they could take this guy. Michael approached him and asked what he should do with the rest. The hero thought for a moment and said to send them for re-education, and if nothing works out, then just get rid of them. Hearing this, Leroy, who did not want to die so early, shouted loudly that they would definitely improve. Robert sighed wearily and told them to get out of here. He didn't have to tell them twice. The men instantly jumped to their feet and almost rolled away. Once everything was settled, Dale rushed to his little brother. After staying for a few more days, Robert and Louise decided it was time to return. The hero appreciated the girl's abilities and said that after his return, he would ask Justin if he could hire her for a permanent job. Louise was glad that she had managed to win her trust. She believed that if she worked even harder, she would definitely achieve even greater success. Lost in thought, she didn't notice how a motorcyclist jumped out onto the road right under her wheels. They failed to avoid the fatal collision. The man fell out of the wrecked motorcycle and landed on the ground, while our heroes escaped with a broken windshield, a headlight, and a dented hood. Louise was too shocked to say anything, but Robert was able to recognize the man who had been hit as the legendary racer known as the Will-o'-the-Wisp. He sighed wearily, grabbed his head, and asked why he had to go through so many problems. Sometime later, they arrived at the nearest hospital. There, Robert gave evidence to the arriving police officer and completed all the necessary paperwork. After handing the man all the papers, he placed a comforting hand on the worried Louise's shoulder and assured her that everything would be fine. They were very lucky that the racer only broke his leg and no one died. The guilt-ridden girl approached the police officer and asked if she could meet the victim. Robert noticed a shadow of doubt on the policeman's face, so he said that they were very worried about what happened. Seeing the care the hero showed her, Louise smiled gratefully, thinking that he was incredibly kind to her. A few moments later, the angry parents of the man who had been hit came out of the room and pounced on our heroes with a litany of accusations. They were stopped by a policeman who reminded them that they were in a hospital, not a market, and therefore they had to remain quiet. But the man ignored his words and shouted that his son was almost killed, so he had every right to express his indignation. He then pointed to the couple in front of him, saying that he would not only demand money from them, but would also sue both of them to have them sent to jail. Robert chuckled and stroked Louise's head reassuringly, telling her that everything would be okay. He then told the man that he had initially intended to pay all the treatment costs if the injured party admitted some of his guilt, but now he would not only save money, but also restore justice. The woman immediately fell into deep hysterics, and Rudolph demanded that the policeman force those responsible for his son's injury not only to pay all the bills, but also to pay compensation for the damage caused. Contrary to his expectations, Milton told the man that they were the ones who should pay because the blame for what happened lay entirely with their son. The policeman explained that Rudolph's son was driving without a license and was not following traffic rules, and that careless driving was in itself a crime. But the man didn't care about the accusations voiced to him. He wasn't going to back down from his own, so he said that he didn't care about all of this. He just wanted those who hit his son to be held accountable for it, because in any case, the culprit of the accident is the driver of the car. Our heroes could not help but be amazed at the level of this man's stubbornness. When the woman was about to throw herself at the policeman with her fists, loudly screaming that her son almost died, so Milton is obliged to take their side, because if those two are not put in jail, the number of victims will increase. But Rudolph stopped his wife from making this mistake. Milton's angry voice could be heard even outside the hospital walls. Quite out of his mind, he asked the restless parents if they even knew how many people were currently in this hospital because of people like their son. And he said that if they wanted compensation, they would get it. But first they would pay all the other victims. With these words, he managed to put the couple in their place. Remembering the heroes still standing there, Milton said that he was finished with them and that they could go now. Thus, they finally left the hospital. Louise was depressed about the whole situation. Robert put his hand on her shoulder and pulled her towards him, saying that everything was resolved, so she had nothing to worry about anymore. He understood perfectly well that when faced with something like this, the mood simply cannot help but fall, so he suggested staying a little longer and resting in this city. The girl responded to his offer to eat and spend the night at a hotel with an agreeable nod. At dinner, Robert indulged in a glass of wine to relieve the stress of the last few days. As soon as they went up to their previously rented room, the hero realized that the problems for today were not over yet. He looked around the room with one huge round bed and a small sofa in bewilderment. The sly smile of the receptionist immediately popped into his head when she announced that all the single rooms were occupied and offered a double room. Robert realized with horror that the girl had misunderstood everything. Louise, blushing with embarrassment, said that he could take the bed, but she would be fine on the sofa. The hero sighed heavily and lay down on the sofa, saying that she could not worry about it and have a good rest, sleeping on a soft bed, because tomorrow they had a long journey ahead of them. Louise nodded, then, even more embarrassed, asked hesitantly if she could take a shower. Robert's face flushed as the image of the girl in the shower involuntarily popped into his mind. Turning his face to the back of the sofa, he replied that she could do whatever she wanted since it was their shared room. Having received permission, Louise did not hesitate and immediately headed to the shower, from which the sounds of water falling on the tiles could soon be heard. Robert tried to fall asleep, but due to such a provocative situation, he was doing it very poorly. He had already regretted more than once that he had drunk alcohol, which made it harder for him to control himself now. Suddenly, an image of an enraged Angelica flexing her fists popped into his head. A couple of minutes later, the sounds of water died down and the girl, dressed only in a thin shirt, came out of the shower, but Robert didn't even move. Wiping her wet hair, an embarrassed Louise hesitantly called the hero by name. He, without raising his head, waved toward the bed, saying that it was time for them to sleep. Robert remained lying in the same position, and Louise, turning off the light, climbed onto the spacious bed and covered herself with a blanket. Because of the stormy flow of thoughts, she could not fall asleep. She was worried about the fact that over the past few days she had already caused trouble to the guy several times, but he had never blamed her, but on the contrary, encouraged her. So she thought about how she could thank him. After lying there for a little while longer, the girl sat up in bed and asked if Robert was sleeping. When he replied no, she reached out from under the blanket and slowly crawled to the edge of the bed, asking if he was cold on the couch. Louise couldn't think of anything else she could do to repay Robert. So, struggling with her embarrassment, she decided to make the first move. Hearing a strange rustling sound, The hero also sat up and, looking towards the bed, asked what was going on there. However, seeing Louise wrapped in a blanket like a cocoon, he assumed that she was playing some kind of game. Suddenly, the girl threw off the blanket and jumped onto Robert's sofa. Robert did not resist her pressure, so that night, as he had originally planned, they were unable to get enough sleep. The next morning, immediately after waking up and having a quick breakfast, they set off on their journey. This time, Robert himself took the wheel. After what had happened between them that night, he felt a little awkward driving with Louise. As he wondered how he could break the tense silence, he suddenly remembered how funny she looked wrapped in a blanket, and he couldn't help but smile, saying that Louise was surprisingly very flexible. The girl, flushed with embarrassment, said that she was very wrong about him, deciding that he would not say such things in broad daylight. Robert only grinned in response, and promising that he would not do it again, offered to check on Angelica. So the first thing they did upon arriving in town was head to the restaurant. Sometime later, the car stopped at a restaurant near the entrance of which the girl was standing. Angelica immediately recognized Robert's car and, delighted by his return, rushed to meet him. However, as soon as she saw that he had returned not alone, but with a girl, she froze in shock. Having sensed the evil, sinister aura emanating from his friend, the hero involuntarily became wary. Angelica was literally seething with anger and, flexing her fists, asked if he had really brought the bride straight from his home. Robert slowly backed away and asked her to give him a chance to explain.